Chapter 850. Let's close the brothel early today. There shouldn't be many customers on New Year's Eve. After a few more days of rest, it'll be time to get busy again. When she walked out of the brothel again, Li Yi was carrying a pile of things in her arms. Most of them were scripts that she wanted to take to Willow Alley to read. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, "Tomorrow is the first day of the Chinese New Year. We can rest for another day. After the second day there will be more customers. We can't be idle until the Lantern Festival." In previous years, the number of customers in these few days is equivalent to a few months of normal days. Silver is something that can never be earned. Doing this will actually lose the original intention. Li Yi shook her head. When she was about to speak again, she suddenly threw the stack of books in her hand into the air. She bent over to support an old man who was leaning on a walking stick and almost falling. Then she reached out with her other hand and let the stack of books land firmly in her hand. "Old man, are you all right?" Seeing that the old man had steadied himself, he let go of his hand and asked. The old man waved his hand and looked him up and down. "Young man, you're quite skilled." Li Yi looked at him. The horizontal wrinkles on his face were like tree bark. From his appearance he looked even older than second great-uncle. Li Yi asked in surprise, "Old man, may I know your age?" A smile appeared on the old man's withered face. He stroked his beard and said, "I'm 73 years old this year." Hearing the old man's words, even Ruoqing, who was standing at the side, was surprised. Normally, people who could live to 50 years old were considered to have lived a long life. 60 years old was even rarer. Those who could live to 70 years old were already considered to be ancestors. An ancestor like this old man who was still running around alone at such an old age was even rarer. Li Yi also knew the meaning of 73 years old in this world. He asked in confusion, "Old man, why are you out alone? Where's your family?" The old man still had a smile on his face. He said, I'm just bored at home and came out for a walk." As he spoke, his eyes were fixed on the young man in front of him. He looked at the youngest marquis in the Jing Kingdom, the minister of Jin Ziguang, the first scholar in the Jing Kingdom, unparalleled in poetry and literature and well-versed in classics, Li Yi, the sycophant that Cui Qingze had mentioned. From what had happened just now, he had a preliminary understanding of him. But it was still too early to make a final conclusion. That was why he had the scene just now and was about to test him. He looked at Li Yi and smiled. Then continue to stroll. We'll be leaving first. There are many people on the street, so remember to be careful when you walk. Don't fall again." The old man stood on the street with his walking stick and looked ahead. Until the young man he saw the young man walk. He closed his mouth slowly after the young man and the woman disappeared. Li Yi also smiled and looked in a certain direction. He turned to look at Wan Ruoqing and said, "Let's go." The old man stood on the street with his walking stick and looked ahead. He didn't close his mouth until the young man and the woman disappeared. A pondering look appeared on the old man's face. A moment later he asked, "Was it a little fake when I fell just now?" Was it?" The middle-aged man nodded and said in a low voice, "Yes, it was too fake." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Didn't you notice it just now?" Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, "No. When I noticed it, you had already helped the old man up." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Although that old man is not young, his body is very strong. He could have thrown away that walking stick. He actually fell down on purpose just now. Moreover, there was another person watching us in the dark. It's very likely that he's his accomplice. Although the old man was very old, he might not even be as good as an actor in terms of acting skills. If it was in the future, he would definitely be beaten to death." A puzzled expression appeared on Wan Ruoqing's face as she said, But why did he? You're just too kind, too pure." Li Yi looked at her and said solemnly, "Nowadays public morals are getting worse day by day and people's hearts are no longer what they used to be. Those bad people have many tricks up their sleeves. For example, that old man just now. If he said that he was knocked down by us and that he suffered a serious internal injury, then he stopped us on the street and asked us to pay him a large sum of money, what should we do? Besides, he has an accomplice in the dark. If he helps him to make false testimony, how can we reason with him?" A look of disbelief appeared on Wan Ruoqing's face. She really hadn't thought about it carefully. However, such an old man, even if he went to the government office, he had to sit in front of the court. Even the county magistrate had to bow to him and serve him carefully. If he really insisted that they were the culprit, then, recalling the kind-looking old man just now, she looked at Li Yi and asked uncertainly, "But the old man just now didn't look like that kind of person? Then do you believe him or me?" "I believe you. That's right. I won't lie to you." Li Yi nodded with satisfaction and warned, "It's a good thing that you are kind, but you have to be more careful. Don't be deceived by some people with bad intentions." Wan Ruoqing nodded obediently and said, "I know. Are you really not going over today?" In the small courtyard in Willow Lane, Li Yi had confirmed with Zui Mo countless times. She shook her head and said, "No, I'll stay here with Sister Ruoqing. You don't have to worry about our place being deserted. At night the sisters in the brothel are all together, and the sisters in the shop who can't go home also come together. It's more lively than your home." Li Yi shook his head and corrected her, "It's our home." She glanced at him and repeated, "Your home." Li Yi raised a hand and asked, "Whose home?" Zheng Zuimo blushed, and a strange feeling came from a certain part of her body. This was his usual method of correcting himself. She rolled her eyes at him and said, "Your home." "Our home." After a few slaps she leaned into Li Yi's arms with a flushed face and whispered, Don't be like this. Sister Ruoqing is still at home. She went to take a bath and won't come out for a while." Li Yi looked around and said, "Other than Xiao Cui, who is hiding behind the tree, nobody saw it." "Xiao Cui." Zheng Zuimo hurriedly came out of Li Yi's arms, lifted her skirt and ran under the osmanthus tree in the yard. "Xiao Cui, ah miss," the little maid's panicked voice came not long after. "Miss, I did it on purpose." "Ah no, I did it on purpose. Ali, help." Li Yi didn't know what she did to Xiao Cui. Not long after, Xiao Cui ran out with a red face covering her butt. A moment later Zuemo also came out of the room. "This is for you." She handed an envelope to Li Yi. "What is this?" Yi was surprised. "What can't be said face to face? This is for you from Lord Zheng." After she finished speaking, she handed him another letter and said, "This is for you from Mrs. Chen." Chapter 851. Sing Madam Chen? Li Yi held the two letters and a trace of surprise appeared on his face. A third Miss Chen had something to say, she could just say it directly when they met here. There was no need to beat around the bush and be so mysterious. This kind of sneaky thing seemed to be Minister Chen's style. What was written in Xing Shichen's letter that he wanted to pass it to him through Zumo. Li Yi first opened Xing Shichen's letter. There was only one piece of paper inside and it was written in large characters. "The Cui family wants to move, be careful of the Chu family." The literal meaning was that the Cui family had been silent for so long and was about to make a move. It also told him to be careful of the Chu family. Chu family, it sounded somewhat familiar. Could the Cui family's actions have something to do with the Chu family? After a closer look he found 4 words at the bottom of the letter: "Burn after reading." There was no hurry to burn it. Li Yi put the letter aside and opened the other one. The handwriting on the letter was crooked like a dog's crawl. It was definitely not written by third Miss Chen, but it was just as he had guessed. "Bewildered heart, treacherous officials, take care." Although Minister Chen had written a few more words than Assistant Minister Zheng, the meaning expressed was a bit unclear. Bewildered heart clearly meant that the emperor had passed away. What did it have to do with treacherous officials? Could it be that Minister Chen also studied horoscopes and planned to overturn the unreliable conclusion made by the predecessors? Besides, with the empress in charge, how could there be treacherous officials in the court? Who would dare to mess up the government? Taking 10,000 steps back, even if there were treacherous officials, the ones who should be worried should be the treacherous officials themselves. What did it have to do with him? Why did he tell him to take care? His gaze moved again. There were also 4 words at the bottom of the letter: "Burn after reading." Both of them sent him letters at the same time. Clearly they hadn't communicated before. It seemed that the rumors about Assistant Minister Zhang and Minister Chen in the court weren't completely groundless. This tacit understanding couldn't be matched by ordinary people. Zheng Zimo looked at him and asked worriedly, "Is there something important?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's just a small matter. Don't worry, your husband is very powerful." "Who's worried?" Zheng Zimo glanced at her and said in a low voice, "Whose husband are you? All right, it's getting late. We should head back." Li Yi shook his head. In the end he didn't want to force her too much. At most he would spend a little more time running around. Before he left, he reminded her, "By the way, remember to burn those 2 letters." Zheng Zimo nodded and watched him walk out the door. He picked up the 2 letters and turned to walk into the kitchen. The next moment, Li Yi's figure appeared in front of her again. He smiled and said, "The next time we meet is next year. Don't you want to kiss me goodbye?" In the end, Li Yi still took Qin Chong and Xing Shichen's warning to heart. The Cui family had not made any moves for a long time. This time the imperial court meeting was approaching, and officials from all over the country were coming to the capital. Even a small matter could have a great impact, so they had to be prepared. But with just Antares guarding the heart, he didn't know what they were going to do and couldn't deal with them in advance. If he could have a reliable spy in the Cui family, how good would that be? However, it was also good that the Cui family had made a move. Only with action could there be a way to deal with it. With Qin Chong and Assistant Minister Zheng, if the Cui family could still turn the tables, it would mean that the king of Shu was favored by the heavens. He might even be able to defy the heavens. Son-in-law. When he walked to the side of the carriage, Fong called out. Li Yi looked back at him and asked, "What is it?" "Face." Fong only said one word. Li Yi wiped his face and asked, "Anything else?" Fong nodded and said, "We can go now." On the last day of the 3rd year of Jing He, Li Yi sat in the carriage and sorted out the big and small things that had happened in the past year. The birth of the young master and young mistress of the Li family was the happiest thing in the family. After going through all the hardships, he finally got together with drunken Mo. Although there was still some distance to the end, it was only a matter of time. Her Royal Highness was in charge of the government, and the people's hearts were in her favor. The overall situation was gradually stabilizing. Yong Ning's psychological trauma was gone, and the Tsundra Lolita was 1 year older. Mississippi Lu had also grown up, and her temperament had actually become gentler recently. Even Fong had become more sensible. He seemed to be full of expectations for the future. There were many customs on New Year's Eve and they were very troublesome. From noon onwards, everyone in the family began to get busy. The maids and servants cleaned the entire house and the floor was spotless. The pillars outside could even reflect the shadows of people when they walked closer. As for the things like putting up couplets, window flowers and lanterns, there was no need to borrow other people's hands. The couplets were written by Li Yi himself. He smeared some paste on them and moved a ladder to put them up. Xiao Huan stood in the distance and shouted, "Young master, it's crooked, crooked, a little more to the left. The left is too much, a little more to the right." The window flowers were made by Mississippi Lu. Li Yi only realized today that he had always underestimated Mississippi Lu. A pair of scissors was waved in her hand like a weapon. Her speed was so fast that even Li Yi could not see it clearly. Soon, there were all kinds of window flowers in her hand, and she distributed them to the maids to put up. Lin Wanru could not help much. Rui was decorating the ancestral shrine, so she carried Li Duan in the courtyard to bask in the sun. The little guy was very familiar with her now, but when he was hungry his hands would not behave, which occasionally made Li Yi feel a little embarrassed. The New Year's Eve dinner was eaten by many people. In terms of atmosphere, it was naturally more lively than the previous 2 years. After that, they made dumplings together to celebrate the new year. Eating dumplings on the first day of the new year was a long-standing custom in the Jing kingdom. After dinner, there was still a long time before dawn. The 2 old madams' bodies could not last until then, so they went to bed early. Duanwu sat there for a while and dozed off and was also taken away by her aunt. After playing mahjong for more than an hour, Li Duan was startled awake by the sound of firecrackers outside. He cried incessantly. Rui hurried to comfort him, but was entangled by him and could not get away. Li Yi saw that Lin Wanru also looked tired, so he tidied up the table and said, "Miss Lin should also go to sleep." Lin Wanru got up and bade farewell. Li Yi felt a weight on his shoulder. Xiao Huan leaned on his shoulder and fell asleep. With great difficulty he carried her back to the room, covered her with the quilt, closed the door and quietly walked out. The courtyard, which was bustling just now, suddenly became quiet. The sound of firecrackers could be faintly heard from afar, flashing in the sky. That was the fireworks set off by the rich families, illuminating the entire sky from time to time. On the stone table in the courtyard, a figure that was somewhat blurred by the flashes of the sky, looked at a certain direction of the night sky and drank by himself. Still not sleeping? Li Yi walked over and sat opposite her. "Noisy." Mississippi Lu replied with one word. Li Yi poured himself a cup of wine, then asked, Are you not used to so many people? It's all right. Mississippi Lou took a sip of wine, her eyes moved away from him. There is wine but no dishes. Li looked at the table, shook his head, stood up and left. Not long after he came back again holding a tray in his hand. On it were a few cold dishes. Mississippi Lou did not seem to be in a good mood. Li passed a pair of chopsticks over and said, "It's boring to drink alone, I will drink with you." Mississippi Lou finally looked away, looked at him and asked, "How many cups can you drink? Isn't it just grape wine? How many cups? You are underestimating me too much." Li disdainfully glanced at the glass wine pot that he usually used to store grape wine on the table, picked up the cup and drank it in one gulp. The spicy taste almost made his tears come out. After covering his throat and coughing a few times, he raised his head and looked at her, widened his eyes and asked, "What degree is it?" "You can't drink it." Mississippi Lou stretched out 5 fingers and said, "Go to sleep." This was looking down on him. Li poured another cup and said, "Isn't it just hard liquor? I'm not even afraid of you, why would I be afraid of it?" Mississippi Lou picked up the wine cup, toasted across the table and drank it in one gulp. Li also drank it in one gulp. Cough, cough. "Forget it, you should go to sleep." I'm telling you, don't look down on me." Then again I'll do it. "Rui, tell me what's bothering you." After a moment, Li hooked his arm around Mississippi Lou's neck, his eyes blurred. "I can give you anything you want, what's there to worry about? Tell me whatever you want, I can give it to you." Mississippi Lou frowned, stood up, held his arm and said lightly, "You're drunk, I'll send you back to your room." "I'm not drunk." Li waved his hand, looked at her, and his eyes became serious and said, "Do you know, in fact, the person I admire the most is you." "Admire me for what?" Mississippi Lou frowned, held him and asked casually as they walked to the door step by step. "I admire you for being beautiful, good at martial arts and so cool. The leader of the martial arts world, it sounds so majestic. Tell me what's there to worry about." A hint of thought appeared on Li Yi's face and suddenly became enlightened and said, "I know, because you can't beat a Mingzu." Mississippi Lou stopped in her tracks and frowned. "I can't beat her." "Oh, it's okay." Li Yi's body swayed and after standing up straight he patted her chest and said, "Although you can't beat her, you're older than her. If you practice more you'll definitely catch up to her. She will never catch up to you." Chapter 852. When he woke up, the sky was already bright. His head hurt a little and his mind was in a mess. He had a dream last night. The moment he woke up he didn't know what he dreamed of, but he suddenly felt a little empty. After sitting up from the bed, his face changed. In his memory he was drinking and chatting happily with second Miss Lu under the moonlight. He closed his eyes and opened them again. How did he end up on the bed? Could it be that last night both of them were drunk and then Li Yi's face was a little pale. He looked down and found that the clothes from yesterday were still on his body, and Mississippi Lou wasn't sleeping beside him. Only then did he feel relieved. Fortunately he was only drunk and didn't do anything reckless after getting drunk. But why did his butt hurt so much? Could it be that it wasn't him who did reckless things to Mississippi Lou, but Mississippi Lou did it to him? Thinking of this he had a terrible headache. He couldn't remember anything about what happened last night at all. Xiao Huan walked in from outside and handed him a wet towel first. Then she brought a cup of tea over and said, "Young master, you're awake. Have some tea to sober up." Li Yi drank the tea in one breath and asked, "Where's second miss?" "Practicing martial arts in the yard." Li Yi got out of bed and only put on an outer shirt. When he walked out of the room he saw Mississippi Lou in white doing Tai Chi leisurely. Her hair was tied up high and she looked a little heroic. Li Yi couldn't care less. He rubbed his butt and walked over. He looked at her suspiciously and asked, "What did you do to me last night?" Mississippi Lou didn't pay attention to him immediately. She finished a set of moves and slowly stopped. Then she glanced at him and said, "You were drunk last night. When I sent you back to your room you rolled off the bed many times." "How do you know that I rolled off the bed many times?" The doubt on Li Yi's face didn't disappear. Even if she rolled off the bed, it was impossible that she only fell on her but every time. Second Miss Lu said lightly, "I stayed by your bedside for the whole night." "You stayed by my bed all night?" Li Yi looked at her with his eyes wide open. "You watched me roll off the bed every time? When you fell asleep last night you called a name 98 times. You're too." Li Yi paused and looked at her and asked, "What?" When you fell asleep last night you called a name 98 times. Mississippi Lou repeated again. Trick, it was definitely a trick. Had she forgotten that he was the one who told her journey to the west? She didn't even change the numbers. This trick was extremely insincere. Li Yi shook his head and said, I slept alone last night. Maybe I'm not used to it. I probably mistook you for Rui. Second young lady Lu nodded, agreeing with his answer. Then she said, you asked drunk Imo to call you 84 times. This. Li Yi hesitated for a moment. He looked at her and asked, you can understand, right? I can understand. Mississippi Lu nodded again and then crossed her arms. She asked again, but you called Emmings 88 times, Ruoqing 96 times, Xiaohuan 13 times, Shaoning twice. How do you want me to understand? The little servant girl stood at the back and was overjoyed. Although the young master only called her 13 times in his dream, as long as she knew that the young master had her in his heart, it was fine even if it was just once. Li Yi shook his head. This was obviously nonsense. It was impossible for him to do nothing the whole night and just call out these names. He relaxed and looked at her. Raising his eyebrows, he said, say, I said these names the whole night and you just listened on the side for the whole night. How bored are you? Mississippi Lou, of course, would not be bored to the point of staying by his bed and listening to him call these names. She just wanted to confirm that he finally said Rui 521 times. Could it be that he was still thinking about the hundreds of thousands of taels of silver that he gave her? I'm just joking. Don't be nervous. She looked at Li Yi deeply, waved her hand and turned to leave. Who's nervous? Li Yi stroked his chest. After washing up he walked out of the door and murmured, I feel like I've forgotten something. Oh yes, I remember. Dumplings. I woke up late and haven't eaten the dumplings. When he walked out of the room he saw the old mistress coming in from outside. After seeing him, a trace of surprise immediately appeared on her face. She asked, why are you still here? Li Yi was a little confused. It was the first day of the new year. Where else could he be? Why didn't you attend the Grand Court Conference? Grand Court Conference? Li Yi was stunned. After thinking for a while he turned and asked Xiao Huan, what's the date today? Strange. What's wrong with this kid today? Why isn't he here yet? In the main hall, old General Shui leaned against a pillar and tilted his head to look. He said doubtfully. The Grand Court Conference was a grand event that was only held once a year. Not only the local officials and nobles would come to the capital, but the officials and nobles of the capital would also definitely attend. It had been almost 4 hours since the Grand Court Conference started, but there was still no sign of him. Could it be that this kid did not intend to come today? Old General Shui looked up. The emperor was unwell, so the dragon throne was naturally empty. The eldest princess sat on the phoenix throne with a phoenix hairpin hanging on her head. When she looked at the officials who were reporting their work, she actually had a dignified air that did not lose to the emperor. In front of the hall, a general who had taken off his armor bowed. Your Highness, General Su Dingyuan led 30,000 soldiers and fought against 50,000 Zhao soldiers in Suzhou. He won a great victory and captured the general who supports the Zhao kingdom, Wu Yunkai. With the divine weapon of Tian Fa, he killed 5,000 enemies, captured more than 10,000 enemies and seized 3 cities. The capital magistrate, Lu Daoist, stepped forward with a ceremonial tablet in his hand. Your Highness, 5 prefectures in Jiangyi and 7 prefectures in Wannan have donated 5,320,000 taels of silver. They have all been returned to the treasury. After Lu Daoist left, an 11-year-old youth dressed in a golden python robe stepped forward. He cupped his fists and said, Your Highness, the first batch of 105 students from the academy have already graduated before the new year. They are waiting for the Ministry of Personnel to make arrangements. The former capital magistrate, the current left minister, Dong Wenyun, said, The autumn reform involves a total of 6 ministries and 13 departments. More than half of it has been completed. The imperial physician, Lu Jimin, said, After the improvement of the method of midwifery, the chances of a woman dying from dystocia have been greatly reduced. County Marquis Li's suturing technique has also made great contributions on the battlefield. Li Mingzhu calmly looked at the officials of the various departments reporting their work. Although 4 hours had passed, there was not the slightest impatience on her face. Over the past year, too many changes had taken place in the Jing state, and from the words of the people below, She would always hear the same name. She tilted her head and looked in a certain direction. There was no one in the seat that should not be empty. When Li Yi walked into the palace, the long queue on both sides had gradually dispersed. Looking at the crowd walking out of the hall, he knew that there was no need for him to come. A figure strode over from the front and pressed on his shoulder. He questioned, "The Imperial Court Conference has already ended. Why are you only here now?" "Since you didn't come, I had to let Prince Jin go in your place. I'm not here to participate in the Imperial Court Conference." Li Yi looked at old General Shui and shook his head in confusion. He said, "I'm just taking a walk, just taking a walk. Old Shui, see you later." He turned and walked in another direction. He raised his hand and waved at old General Shui casually. Chapter 853. "This bastard," General Shui shook his head and said as he watched him leave. What kind of opportunity was the Grand Court Assembly? Officials from all over the country would gather here. If he could make a name for himself in the Grand Court Assembly, his name would be known throughout the country. Moreover, even if he was not present today, the merits of heavenly punishment, the merits of education, and the merits of reform would all be attributed to him. From today onwards, the name Li Yi would truly be known throughout the court. Not only the court in the capital, but the officials of the various provinces would also not easily forget this name. Not far behind him, Cui Qingze, Qin Chong, and Xing Shichen walked side by side. Cui Qingze looked at the back of the figure, his eyes drifting, and murmured, "This Marquis Li is really famous today." Qin Chong rubbed his hands and also sighed, "Today is really cold." Xing Shichen wrapped his robe and nodded, "Yes." Li Yi walked to the door of the morning dew hall. Knowing that the princess had returned, he walked in. The maid at the door knew that the Marquis Li did not need to inform the princess when he came, so she let him enter the room. There was a huge sand table in the room. The sand dunes on it rose and fell, and there were all kinds of intersecting lines. Emingzu stuck 3 small flags on a few sand dunes. When Li Yi walked in, he happened to see this scene. "Another city of the Zhou kingdom has been conquered?" Emingzu looked back at him walking in and nodded, saying, "It was originally a counterattack, but General Su made a prompt decision and pursued the enemy. He captured a general of the Zhou kingdom and conquered 3 cities in a row." This time, Li Yi did not reply but looked at the princess in surprise. More accurately, he was looking at her attire. Only the empress could wear the phoenix crown, but today's grand court conference was presided over by her. In order to distinguish her status, she still had a phoenix hairpin on her head. With the phoenix hairpin on, not only did she not look more feminine, but she looked domineering from afar. This was also the first time he had seen this attire. It was elegant and dignified, but it also had a different kind of temptation. Emingzu turned her head and asked, "Why didn't you attend court today?" "I drank a little last night." Li Yi rubbed his head and said, "I accidentally overslept." Emingzu frowned. "It's not like you don't know your alcohol tolerance. Why are you so careless?" Last night, he had wanted to prove himself to Mississippi Lu, but he had overestimated himself. As he drank, he lost consciousness. He did not know if she had taken advantage of him when she helped him back to his room. He shook his head to dispel these thoughts and asked, "Is everything going well?" The Grand Court Assembly is held every year and the protocol is fixed. It's not like it's going to be smooth or not, it's just following the prescribed order. She pointed at the sand table in front of her and the detailed reports of the various ministries on the table beside it. She thought about the changes in the Jing kingdom over the past year and murmured, "Although the imperial court meeting is the same, the world is different after all." Li Yi just looked at her like this. At this moment, it seemed that he really saw an emperor who looked down on the world. As for this world, they had gone through many hardships and fought for it step by step. Of course, there were more hardships waiting for them on this road. "Your Highness, His Majesty summons you." A palace maid of the morning dew palace came in with a eunuch and said respectfully. Li Yi yawned and said, "Go ahead. I'll find a place to rest for a while. I didn't sleep well yesterday." The eunuch stepped forward and said, "His Majesty said that if County Marquis Li is also here, he can go with you. I know my body. It's like this every year. After another half a month, when the weather is warmer, I will naturally be better." Emperor Jing lay on the soft bed and looked at the old man sitting on the chair beside him. Facing the ruler of the country, the old man's tone was still neither slow nor slow. "Your Majesty's body is important, but the country's politics are related to the livelihood of the people. It cannot be neglected." Emperor Jing shook his head and said, Grand Tutor, you don't have to worry about this. During this time, Emingzu has been managing the government on my behalf. The court is stable and everything is smooth. If not, I would not have been able to rest in peace. Although the princess is talented, it is not the right way for a woman to manage the government. She can't last long. The old man looked at him and said slowly. Emperor Jing nodded and asked, Grand Tutor, have you also heard of the Antares guarding heart celestial phenomenon? The old man nodded and said, I have heard of it. Emperor Jing looked up and said, could it be that my time has really come? Although the Antares guarding heart celestial phenomenon has appeared, nothing is absolute. His Majesty probably does not believe in this. The old man shook his head and said, but this abnormal celestial phenomenon may be a warning. The position of the Eastern Palace has been empty for a long time. His Majesty should also set a standard early and set an example for the people of the world. Emperor Jing nodded and said, I naturally know about this. Seeing this, the old man did not speak again. As the Grand Tutor and also the Emperor's teacher, he had to remind the Emperor of this. But if he went further, it would be a little overboard. Although he had retired for many years, he still had a measure of these things in his heart. It is a pity that I did not attend today's court meeting. Emperor Jing opened a long memorial. His eyes flashed and he murmured, if I could be 10 years younger, I would not have to let Emingzu shoulder such a heavy burden. The old man also had a look of approval in his eyes. He nodded and said, although the eldest princess is a woman, her filial piety is commendable. She can be said to be a woman who is not inferior to men. Emperor Jing smiled and asked, Grand Tutor, you have been traveling for 3 years. I wonder what interesting things you have heard along the way. The old man nodded and said, the more I have traveled, the more I have seen. The two talked and laughed in the hall. Outside the hall, Li Yi shook his head and said, can't you just pretend that I have not been there? Emingzu glanced at him and did not speak. The two were led in by a eunuch. The eunuch bowed and said, Your Majesty, the eldest princess and County Marquis Li have arrived. Greetings, Father. Greetings, Your Majesty. After stepping into the hall and bowing, Li Yi raised his head and was stunned when he saw the old man sitting in front of the old emperor's bed. The old man stood up and bowed to Emingzu. Greetings, Princess. Emingzu walked over and supported him with both hands. She quickly said, Grand Tutor, you don't have to be so polite. Please sit down. Grand Tutor? Li Yi looked at the blackmailer old man he met yesterday and was even more surprised. The blackmailer old man looked at him and a smile appeared on his bark-like face. He said, Young man, we meet again. Emingzu looked at the old man and her eyes finally stopped on Li Yi. Emperor Jing looked surprised and asked, Grand Tutor, you have already met him? Chapter 854. When I was on the street yesterday, I saw a shabby woman with a seriously ill child in her arms. She asked for help but was ignored by others. Only one person stepped forward bravely and helped her. The old man stroked his beard and said, I just didn't expect that the young man who helped the needy was County Marquis Li. Li also didn't expect that the blackmailer old man he met yesterday was actually the imperial tutor of the imperial court, the teacher of the emperor, a famous Confucian scholar, and an example in the hearts of scholars in the Jing kingdom. Such a person was reduced to blackmailing in the street, which showed how bad the morals of the Jing kingdom had become. Her Royal Highness should pay more attention to the construction of the style in the future. As soon as Li Yi's voice fell, Mingzhu's originally nervous expression suddenly relaxed. Jing Emperor looked at the two of them in surprise. Is there such a thing? The old man smiled and said, Yesterday on the long street, passers-by all looked at the mother and daughter coldly. Only County Marquis Li was willing to help, which shows that Your Majesty has a good judgment of people. With such a character he can be called a pillar of the country. Jing Emperor nodded and said with a smile, That's right. Although this child usually plays around a lot, I am very confident in his character. Grand Tutor was able to judge his character with just one look. Isn't it because you have a pair of discerning eyes? Li Yi looked at the two of them and secretly said, How shameless. He was the one who had the heart of a bodhisattva, was willing to help others, was handsome, elegant. Yet this blackmailer Grand Tutor and the old emperor actually praised themselves. This kind of behavior was simply unheard of. He secretly glanced at Her Royal Highness and found that her face was calm. Maybe she had long been used to this kind of shameless scene. After feeling his gaze, she turned her head and slightly raised her eyebrows, signaling him to be calm. Li Yi helplessly lowered his head. He came out in a hurry in the morning and didn't eat anything. He was still thinking about the dumplings. The two of them did not know when they talked about the Grand Court Conference. The old man stroked his beard again and looked at Li Yi in surprise, saying, "I only knew that he was outstanding in literature, but I didn't know that he had such achievements. He even has such views on the country. Oh, I remember the young hero that Qinwen mentioned a few days ago, and the reform method proposed coincides with his ideas these years. It should be him. His ability is not limited to this." Jing Emperor smiled and turned to look at Li Yi, saying, "In today's Grand Court Conference, the officials of various provinces returned to the capital to report their work and put forward many political opinions. They put forward a lot of political opinions. The preliminary reform of the 6 ministries is almost finished. What do you think?" The old man surnamed Chu also looked over. "Ideas?" Li Yi turned to look at Her Royal Highness and murmured, "Yes, what ideas do I have?" Emingzi looked at him and walked forward. She said to Jing Emperor, "Father, just now in the morning dew hall, I had a deep discussion with Dr. Li about what I saw and heard in the recent Grand Court Conference. He believes that the reform of the Ministry of Revenue's tax system still needs to be improved. The reform of the local military system is a bit too hasty. It should be done step by step so that it can be stable." Li Yi breathed a sigh of relief. Looking at Her Royal Highness, who spoke confidently in the face of the old emperor and the blackmailer, he felt that it was not in vain that he brought her soup so many times. Then his eyes couldn't help but look at her chest. He was slightly startled and realized that his efforts were not in vain. After listening to her, Jing Emperor nodded with satisfaction and said, "There are some things that I wanted to remind you about, but now it seems that there is no need to do so." The blackmailer also had a strange expression on his face. He murmured, "Indeed, heroes come from the young. When I was his age, I was still studying. How could I understand these matters of state affairs? I only know a little. Li Yi said modestly. The old man waved his hand and said, "If you only knew a little, Qinwen would not have given you such an evaluation." He looked at Li Yi again and asked, "Recently, the imperial astronomer observed the celestial phenomenon of Mars guarding the heart." Li Yi did not wait for him to finish and interrupted, "I'm afraid that Grand Tutor has asked the wrong person about this question. This blackmailer really had bad intentions." He wanted him to say something like, "Mars guarding the heart," in front of the old emperor. Ordinary people knew what Mars guarding the heart meant. As a great scholar, how could he not know? The old man frowned and looked at him. He asked, "What do you mean? You mean who should I ask about this?" Emingzi glanced at Li Yi vaguely, indicating that he should not talk nonsense. The old emperor's expression was indifferent. It seemed that he was not interested in this matter. Ever since the officials of the imperial astronomer planned to treat his asthma with elixirs, he did not trust them much. "Of course, you should ask the president of the Academy of Sciences, Crown Prince Zhou Xian." Jing Emperor finally looked at him. The blackmailer looked puzzled. Only Emingzi seemed to think of something, and her face showed a look of understanding. Li Yi explained, "Recently, the Academy of Sciences has developed something that allows people to observe the stars in the sky more clearly. As a matter of fact, I saw Mars a few days ago. I believe that Crown Prince Zhou Xian will be able to answer your doubts about Mars guarding the heart." A long time ago, after the glass was produced, Li Yi had the idea of making a telescope. Of course, it was time-consuming and laborious to polish the lens by hand. It also required a certain skill. The simplest and most convenient way was to ask the Academy of Sciences to do it. There was never a shortage of skilled craftsmen and freaks who were crazy about science. Of course, he could not let him do it for free. In return, Li Yi told him the method of making an astronomical telescope. Although the current manufacturing level was far from the level of scientific research, it was not a problem to look at the craters on the moon and observe a few stars that were relatively close. With a crude astronomical telescope, Li Xian's interest temporarily shifted to looking at the stars. It was fine to look at it alone, but he also brought the crown prince's wife and Shen Shu to look at it together. Especially after telling them some basic astronomical knowledge, he had already asked the crown prince's wife to draw a sketch of the solar system. The next step was to make a model and plan to make a more sophisticated instrument to find those stars one by one. Li Yi was not worried that he would be tied to a pillar and burned like the sages in the other world. This kind of thing only happened in the West. In ancient times, there was no debate between the heliocentric theory and the geocentric theory in China. There was no debate here either. There were only different theories. Everyone expressed their own opinions and did not agree with each other. If they argued too much, they would just fight and listen to the winner. Of course, there were other reasons for this. Western religions needed these theories to prove that God was in heaven. Overthrowing theories was equivalent to overthrowing God. The god of the Jing kingdom was lying on the bed in front of Li Yi. Overthrowing the theory of Mars guarding the heart. The old emperor must be very happy. If he smiled, he might live for a few more seconds. As for whether Li Xian's theory would cause some people's beliefs to collapse and their worldview to be reshaped, this was not something he considered. But there was one thing he was sure of. If anyone dared to tell him in front of him that Mars guarding the heart meant that Mars was close to the heart, it meant that the emperor who doted on him was dying and he might beat him to death. Li Yi looked at Grand Tutor Chu again. He wondered how many punches he could take from the crown prince. Chapter 855. Can the Academy of Sciences really see Mars clearly? Emmingzi couldn't help but turn her head and ask as the two walked out of the hall. It was impossible for it to be clear. The so-called clear only meant that one could vaguely see a spherical object. Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's not as clear as seeing the moon, but it's definitely much clearer than the imperial astronomers. It's enough to prove that the so-called Mars guarding the heart is only a joke." The distance between Mars and Xianxia had long exceeded the imagination of the current people. The saying that the star of misfortune was close to the emperor was simply untenable. You don't have to worry about anything happening to His Majesty. Li Yi shook his head and looked at her. "I'm worried that someone will take advantage of Mars guarding the heart to harm you." Emmingzi didn't think much of it. "What does Mars guarding the heart have to do with me?" Li Yi shook his head and murmured, "I'm just afraid that some people will go crazy." Cui family. Cui Qingming looked at Cui family head Cui Qingze and asked with a frown, "Big brother, how confident are you in this matter?" Cui Qingze sighed and said, "If the Chu family is willing to stand out and support us, then we have an 80 to 90% chance of success. But Grand Tutor Chu has been playing dumb with us and refusing to help. A 50% chance is already very good. I still think it's a bit far-fetched." Cui Qingming shook his head and said, "Those ignorant people may believe it, but those in the court won't be so easy to incite." Cui Qingze's eyes flashed as he murmured, "What we want is to incite those ignorant people. Once it's established, it'll be difficult to reverse it, and those officials can only go along with it." Before the Lantern Festival, the officials attending the Grand Court Conference usually won't leave the capital. Once it becomes public opinion, even His Majesty can't remain silent. I don't believe that no matter how powerful the eldest princess is, she can shut the mouths of the world and control what they say. She really can. Li Yi hid behind the rockery and picked up a cylindrical object. He put it in front of his eyes and showed off to Rui. "Look, it's at least 30 feet from here to Rui's room. With this, you can see what she's doing in the room. She's folding her doo-doo, pink and sky blue. Last time I told her that sky blue suits her, but she didn't listen." Rui took the monocular she got from Li Xian and said in amazement, "Really, these two small pieces of glass are so magical when they are inlaid." "Amazing, isn't it?" Li Yi said proudly. "There's something even more amazing. In a few days I'll borrow the bigger one from the Academy of Sciences. Let's watch the stars together at night. It is indeed magical." Rui put down the binoculars and said, "It's just that my husband is mistaken. The one in the Rui room is Xiao Huan." "Xiao Huan?" Li Yi picked up the binoculars in surprise and looked again. He asked, "What about Rui?" "Here." Suddenly, an extremely clear face appeared in front of him. Li Yi was startled and dropped the binoculars in his hand. In a flash, the binoculars appeared in Mississippi Lu's hands. She imitated Li Yi's look and a surprised expression appeared on her face. With a light leap, she stood on top of the rockery and looked into the distance with a pair of binoculars. After another leap, Mississippi Lu was gone. The only telescope he got from Li Xian was also gone. The binoculars that had been taken away by the Lu family's second young miss couldn't be returned. Li Xian had made pretty good quality binoculars, but there were only 2 or 3 of them. One had been taken by the military for research. This was a must-have item for war. Tie a person to a kite and use the binoculars to look through. Any ambush was all nonsense. The military had even trained a group of air forces. Although the number was small and the process might be relatively tragic, it was said that in the last war with the Zhou kingdom, a small number of military elites flew in the sky and dropped bombs. It was indeed a dazzling scene. So mysterious. What is this? Zheng Zimo asked in surprise, holding a new telescope in her hand. Li Yi also held one in his hand. Although the quality wasn't as good as the one Mississippi Lu took away, the effect wasn't much worse. He pointed it at a mountain in the distance and said, like this, slowly turn the telescope until the field of vision becomes clear. Then you can clearly see the things on the mountain in the distance. Yes, just like this. Look, you can even see the people on the mountainside clearly. Look at the plum forest, there are two people there. Move it closer and see clearly. It's a man and a woman. At this time of year they are going up the mountain to enjoy the plum blossoms. What are they doing? Why are they suddenly hugging each other? Hey, why is that woman taking off her clothes? Hey, don't snatch her. Li Yi looked at the Luo Shui goddess who was looking at him with a face full of shame and anger and said, give me back the telescope. The plum blossoms on the mountainside are really beautiful. Shameless. The Luo Shui goddess glanced at him and left angrily. Wan Ruoqing came out with a plate of freshly made pastries. She looked back and asked in confusion, what's wrong with drunk Mo? Li Yi waved his hand and said, I wanted to go up the mountain to enjoy the plum blossoms, but she didn't want to go. It's okay. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and seemed to have thought of something. She said, by the way, there's one more thing I think I should tell you. What is it? Li Yi looked at her and asked in confusion. It's related to Her Royal Highness. Wan Ruoqing thought for a moment and said, there have been some sounds in the brothel these days. Hey, have you heard of Antares guarding the heart? In a brothel somewhere in the capital, several onlookers were chatting while listening to the play. Suddenly one of them said mysteriously. One of them immediately nodded and said, of course I've heard of it. It's said that every time there's a celestial phenomenon of Antares guarding the heart, it means that the emperor is in trouble. This is an incredible event. The current emperor is ill and there's a celestial phenomenon these days. Doesn't it mean that, halfway through his sentence he abruptly stopped. However, from the side someone came over and asked in confusion, what exactly is going on with what you're talking about? It's said that this is a jinx attacking His Majesty. Someone lowered his voice and said, Antares is too strong. His Majesty has always been in poor health, so it's easy for him to be attacked by Antares. It's said that this Antares is the current Princess Royal. Shu, how dare you talk about this kind of thing? I didn't say it. That's what people are saying. You mean that the Princess Royal is too strong and is at odds with His Majesty, so... I didn't say it. It's said that after the princess took over the government, there was a trend of Antares. This woman getting involved in politics, maybe it's true. What a blind fool. The voices of the crowd gradually quieted down. A middle-aged man sitting in the corner of the brothel murmured. He stood up, shook his head and said, let's go. A man behind him said in confusion, the play isn't over yet. Don't you want to watch? The middle-aged man shook his head and said, we've seen all the play here. Let's go somewhere else. Where else? Today I'll take you to the wonderful sound pavilion to listen to music. The big man was stunned and then he suddenly smiled and said, the wonderful sound pavilion. I heard that the girls there are. The middle-aged man suddenly felt a blow on his head. He withdrew his hand and scolded, you useless thing. This is a place to listen to music. What do you want to do? I don't want to. The big man repeatedly shook his head. I'm a decent person. I don't do that kind of thing. The middle-aged man was stunned and asked, don't want to what? I've already warned the people in the brothel not to spread this matter. But we can't control those customers. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked with some worry, will it be very troublesome? Bang. Li Yi picked up a piece of pastry and put it in his mouth. After shaking his head, he looked at Wan Ruoqing and asked, when did it start? Wan Ruoqing looked at him and said, about 2 or 3 days ago. At first there were only a few people talking about it. Later, when the number of people increased, we realized that there was probably someone behind it. Li Yi picked up another piece of pastry and shook his head. He said, it's the new year, why bother? Chapter 856. After the first day of the new year, according to tradition, the next step was to visit relatives and friends. Throughout the year, relatives and friends would visit each other. The Li family had many relatives and friends in the capital. Previously with the old mistress, Li Yi had also visited a few of them. This year he was a lot more free. Lin Wanru had to go on a business inspection in the capital and usually returned very late. Li Yi asked Feng to send a few people to follow her. Although it was the new year, there were still many people who were restless. Nonsense. In the hibiscus garden, Emperor Jing threw several memorials from the imperial astronomer and the imperial censorate on the table and said coldly, "The star of calamity, Mars. The Princess Royal, is she someone they can slander?" Emingzu walked over and patted his back. She said softly, "Father, don't be angry. Your health is more important. As for those, they are nothing more than rumors. It doesn't matter. I know you don't care, but 3 people make a tiger. If we let it develop, I don't know what will happen in the end." Emperor Jing frowned and said, "When the heavenly hound swallowed the sun, they said that I was immoral and should issue an edict. When the heavenly hound ate the moon, they said that I was too strict with the law and should restructure the law and investigate the injustice. Now when Mars guarded his heart, they said that it was not enough for me to die, they even implicated you." On the other side, Li Yi sat on the lawn and took a bite of cucumber. The solar and lunar eclipses were all pushed to the heavenly hound. What sin did the heavenly hound commit? Li Xian squatted beside him. He had held the half a cucumber in his hand for a quarter of an hour, but he did not take another bite. He was thinking. At first he was thinking about a problem. Now he was thinking about life. These days he had been studying astrology and celestial phenomena. At first he asked Li Yi out of curiosity why he always saw the lightning first and heard the thunder later when it thundered. Later he knew that the speed of light was faster than the speed of sound. Therefore when there was thunder in the distance he always saw the lightning first and then heard the thunder. It turned out that light also needed time to spread. It turned out that when he raised his head, what he saw was the sun from half an hour ago, the Big Dipper from 100 years ago, and the Heart constellation from 500 years ago. Even when he looked up at the starry sky at night, one of the stars he saw had already disappeared. It turned out that even though Li Yi was standing in front of him, the person he saw was not the person he saw at that time. "Hey, are you okay?" Li Yi raised the cucumber and waved it in front of him. He was a little regretful and worried. He really shouldn't have said so much just now. The scale and magnitude of the starry sky had far exceeded the limits of what people could imagine. If after realizing the vastness of the universe and his own insignificance, it caused him to have thoughts that he shouldn't have, that would be a great sin. Li Xian looked up at him and asked solemnly, "Who are you?" Li Yi met his gaze for a moment and finally sighed, saying, "Looks like I can't hide it anymore." He looked at Li Xian and said seriously, "To tell you the truth, actually I transmigrated here from more than 1,000 years in the future." Li Xian looked at him and thought for a moment, then said seriously, "If that's the case, I won't hide it from you. Actually, I'm from the moon. People from the moon, hello. People from the future, hello." The two of them raised the cucumbers and touched them together. Then there were 2 kacha sounds. Li Xian was very smart, and under Li Yi's long-term indoctrination and training, his ability to accept new things was unusually strong. He almost never doubted Li Yi because even if he did, he would always find evidence to prove that he was right one day. At that time when Li Yi told him that the stars he saw were actually just balls, he didn't believe it. However, now that he had seen it with his own eyes, it turned out that those stars were really balls. "What are you going to do about the matter of Emingzu?" Li Xian lay on the lawn, folded his hands behind his head and said, "Let them slander her like that." Li Yi shook his head and said, "This I still have to rely on you. Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Li Xian sat up again from the lawn, his eyes flashing with excitement. Changde stood behind Emperor Jing and said, "According to the report from the Secret Intelligence Division, those slanderous remarks against Her Royal Highness have not spread widely. There are indeed many rumors among the people, but compared to the previous public discussions, the impact is much smaller." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "What does it have to do with Emingzu? My people are not stupid. They know how to distinguish right from wrong and will not be easily used by those who do bad things. Moreover, the things that Emingzu has done for the people, they are all beneficiaries. How can they do such ungrateful things?" Changde nodded and said, "Maybe it's true." But he knew in his heart that this was not the only reason. In contrast, the matter of the Cui family's master and his second brother cutting off their sleeves and neglecting his wife, causing the first wife of the Cui family to have an affair with the third son of the Cui family, was more interesting than whether Her Royal Highness was a jinx. He was also very interested in this matter. It was said that the circle of the nobles in the capital was extremely chaotic, but he did not expect it to be so chaotic. Even so, we can't relax our vigilance. Emperor Jing frowned and said, "Pass down the order. If anyone in the capital continues to spread such bad words, they will be flogged 50 times. Your Majesty, this matter must not be." Li Yi came over from the side and explained, "Preventing the people's mouths is more important than preventing a river. The more we suppress it, the more it will rebound. At that time, even if Her Royal Highness is not a jinx, she will be called a jinx by them." Seeing him come over, Emperor Jing lay back on the rocking chair, waved his hand and said, "Don't beat around the bush. If you have any ideas, just say it. It's better to spread the public opinion than to block it. Since everyone thinks that a jinx has rushed to the emperor, as long as they know that Yinghua and Xinsu are far apart and can't collide no matter what, wouldn't it be better?" After listening to Li Yi, Emperor Jing seemed to think of something. He straightened up and turned to look at Li Xian, asking, "Can the Academy of Sciences really see Yinghua clearly?" Li Xian nodded and said with a smile, "Uncle Emperor, in 3 days Xian'er is going to hold a stargazing meeting at the Academy of Sciences. At that time, not only Uncle Emperor but the royal family, the nobles in the capital, and the ministers in the capital can all see the true appearance of Yinghua. If Uncle Emperor is interested, you can also see what is on the moon." Emperor Jing looked at him and pondered for a moment before asking, "How confident is the Directorate of Astronomy?" Li Xian smiled and said, "Xian'er is going to ask the Directorate of Astronomy. It's obviously just an ordinary solar and lunar eclipse. How can it be related to the Heavenly Hound? Yinghua and Xinsu are thousands of miles apart. How can they meet? How can this be a warning from heaven and an ominous sign?" Emperor Jing was puzzled. "Solar and lunar eclipse?" Li Xian nodded and said, "Its Heavenly Hound swallows the sun, and Heavenly Hound eats the moon. 3 days later, Xian'er will tell Uncle Emperor how the solar and lunar eclipses are formed. This is just a normal astronomical phenomenon, not an ominous sign, and Uncle Emperor can't be blamed." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "There's no need to stay at the Academy of Sciences. 3 days later, I will hold a banquet in Hibiscus Garden with the ministers. Your stargazing meeting will be held there." Chapter 857. How's the situation outside? Cui Qingze was pacing in the room when he saw a man hurrying in from outside. He immediately asked. The confidant of the Cui family naturally knew what the family master was concerned about these days. He immediately said, "Master, I've sent more people, but there's still no effect at present." "That's strange." Cui Qingze furrowed his brows. Previously, the king of Shu was called the Virtuous King and was crowned as the Crown Prince. The speed at which the news spread was incredible. Before anyone could react, it had already formed a strong public opinion in the capital. It was precisely because of this that the angry emperor drove him out of the capital. Neither the Cui family nor the imperial concubine had time to think of a way to save him. But this time it was the same method, and he even sent so many people to add fuel to the fire and spread the news everywhere. Why didn't it work? While Cui Qingze was puzzled, the confidant of the Cui family was also secretly watching him. There weren't many people talking about the eldest princess, but there were many people talking about the Cui family. The fact that the clan master and the second master were gay was pure nonsense. It was just a rumor spread by those people outside. As a member of the Cui clan, they knew the character of the clan master and the second master. There was no such thing as being gay or sharing peaches. It was just some people with ulterior motives who wanted to discredit them. But the family master's wife and the third master, they really didn't pay attention to it before. After being reminded, they were surprised to find that the family master's wife and the third master were closer than they were with other people. Could it be that someone in the Cui family who knew about this spread it? Cui Jian, Cui Jian? Cui Jian suddenly raised his head and saw the family master looking at him. He came back to his senses and immediately asked, "What else do you want me to do, master?" Cui Qingze waved his hand and said, "No, you can go now. Pay more attention to the situation outside these 2 days." "Yes, if the family master has no other orders, I'll go first." Cui Jian replied respectfully. When he retreated to the door, a voice came from behind him again. "Wait a minute." Cui Qingze looked at him with no expression on his face and asked lightly, "What has Qing Duo been doing these days?" "Third master?" Cui Jian was stunned. He looked at the family master and said with his head down, "I don't know. Wait, where are you going? Come back." Li Yi called out to Li Xian as soon as he saw him leave the Great Hall and rush out of the Furong Garden. The stargazing gathering is in 3 days. I have to go back and prepare. Surprised, Li Xian said, "Didn't you say that I should take it seriously? When the time comes, I still have to deal with those fellows from the Imperial Astronomer. How can I not prepare in advance?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Have you thought about what to say?" Li Xian said excitedly, "Of course I have." The question of why he first saw lightning and then heard thunder was enough to give him a headache. What a magical starry sky. Just now his head was about to split open. Such an interesting matter, of course, it was better for everyone to have a headache together. Li Yi asked tentatively, "Say that the you standing in front of them is actually not the you now. Say that the sun they see is the sun from 15 minutes ago. Say that the Big Dipper in the sky is the Big Dipper from more than 100 years ago. Say that if you look at the starry sky at a 45-degree angle, you can see the past." "Yes, that's it. Do you have anything else to add?" Li Xian nodded vigorously and then asked doubtfully, "Why a 45-degree angle?" "Add my ass." Li Yi grabbed his arm and said with a dark face, "Let's get in the carriage first." When the carriage arrived at the gate of the Academy of Sciences, Li Xian jumped off the carriage looking a little dispirited. "Remember everything I said just now?" Li Yi asked again to confirm. "Yes." Li Xian lowered his head and said, "Let them look at the stars and overturn the conclusion of Antares guarding the heart. Tell them that the cause of the solar and lunar eclipses is not because of His Majesty's immorality, but because of the astronomical warning. Other than that, don't say anything else." Li Yi looked at him and frowned. "You'd better remember what I said. This is not a joke. Saying too much will do you no good." In the Jing Kingdom, no one dared to put Li Xian on fire just because of what he said. If his thinking was a little advanced with His Majesty's protection, he could also speak logically and justifiably. At most, it was an academic argument which was nothing. However, if his thinking was too advanced, it was very likely that he would be regarded as a madman. Maybe it would also touch the point of the feudal dynasty, and it would be difficult to clean up the mess. The purpose of this stargazing meeting was to dispel the rumors about the princess spread by the Cui family, and at the same time to clear the old emperor's name. It was not to spread science. If he did not emphasize it again and again, Li Xian was likely to confuse the two. Seeing Li Xian step into the gate of the Academy of Sciences after making 3 promises, he became excited again. Li Yi felt that it was better for him to see it in person 3 days later. "Young master, why is the moon so bumpy?" Xiao Huan came down from a high platform in the courtyard and said with some disappointment. Li Yi touched her head and said, "Didn't I tell you before? This is the true appearance of the moon." Xiao Huan's pretty face was still a little disappointed. It was fine that there was no Chang'e Jade Rabbit Guanghan Palace on the moon, but it was actually so ugly. The last bit of hope in her heart was finally completely shattered. Rui came down from the high platform and asked Li Yi, "Husband, will you also use it to see the moon in Hibiscus Garden tomorrow?" Li Yi nodded. The Academy of Sciences had only made 1 telescope for astronomical observations so far. Li Xian treasured it like a treasure and it was not easy for him to borrow it. "I have seen it today, so I won't go tomorrow night. Dwainer doesn't sleep well at night. If he doesn't see me when he wakes up, he will definitely cry." Rui looked at him and said. Li Yi nodded and said, "If you don't want to go, then don't go. In fact, it's not that interesting." Rui didn't really like that kind of lively occasion. Moreover, Li Xian wasn't really kind enough to invite those people to see the moon tomorrow. There might even be a fight, so he didn't force Rui to go with him. Turning his head, he saw that Mississippi Lu had finished looking at the moon and was looking at the telescope itself. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat and he immediately said, "This won't do. This will be of great use tomorrow. I can't take it. Tonight to Hibiscus Garden?" In the Willow Lane, Zheng Zimo looked at him in surprise and asked, "Isn't that the Imperial Garden?" Li Yi looked at her and said, "There will be a lot of fun to see tonight. Do you want to go with me?" He felt a bit bad that he didn't have much time to spend with her these few days. She liked crowds and should be more interested in such an occasion. "Husband Li, Sister Lu is not going?" Zheng Zimo looked at him and asked. Li Yi shook his head. Then let me think about it." She was actually a bit tempted. After all, this was a rare opportunity to be alone with him. However, their relationship hadn't been made public, so it was a bit inappropriate to appear with him like this. An idea suddenly appeared in her mind. A glimmer of light flashed through her eyes. She nodded and said, "Okay, I'll go with you tonight, Tui Manor." Stargazing meeting, what is it? Tui Chingza held an invitation in his hand and turned back to ask, "Is Madam free tonight? How about we go together?" The woman shook her head and said, "I'm a bit tired today. Master, you can go by yourself." Tui Chingza nodded. When he walked out of the room, he saw someone coming from the side corridor. He thought for a moment and asked, "Qingduo, His Majesty is holding a banquet in Hibiscus Garden tonight and inviting all the officials to participate in the stargazing meeting. Do you want to go together?" Stargazing meeting? Third Master Tui shook his head and said, "I'm not interested. Besides, I'm drinking with friends tonight. Big brother, you should go by yourself." Chapter 858. You are. At the entrance of a small courtyard in Willow Alley, Li Yi was stunned as he looked at the handsome man who walked out of the courtyard. Although the handsome man looked a little feminine, he didn't lose his heroic spirit. However, this wasn't the problem. The problem was that she wasn't dressed like this when he saw her in the morning. Li Yi looked at her in surprise and asked, "Why are you dressed like this? This way it won't be easily seen through." The goddess of Luo Shui seemed to be very confident in her male appearance and said with a little pride. Li Yi knew that she was thinking for his sake. He shook his head and didn't say anything else. "Go." She held onto Li Yi's arm and walked out of the alley. "Wait." Li Yi turned around and looked at her. He looked her up and down and finally stopped at a certain place. He said in surprise, "Where are your breasts?" She immediately blushed. Shameless. Impossible. Why did they suddenly disappear? Was it just an illusion before? He was puzzled. His arm was gently pinched and then he heard her extremely shy voice. "Entangled, entangled." On the street outside the alley, the sloppy old man looked at Fong and asked in surprise, "That thing can see the moon?" "Of course." Fong looked at him and said with some regret, "I wanted to call you yesterday and let you broaden your horizons. Unfortunately, I couldn't find you." Seeing a figure walking out of the alley, he immediately jumped off the carriage. He saw the son-in-law and a handsome man walking out hand in hand. He stood there in a daze. The next moment he turned his head and sat next to the sloppy old man again. He said, "The moon is really big and round today." However, the son-in-law said that Chang'e isn't on the moon. "It's a pity. When I was young, I wanted to marry her when I grew up." The carriage stopped at the entrance of Furong Garden. When he got off the carriage, the handsome man's face was still a little red. He followed 2 steps behind Li Yi and didn't want to get closer. Li Yi took 2 steps back and said, "Just be normal. Don't worry, no one will think too much." Fong was not interested in watching the show and the sloppy old man was the same. After sending them in, the 2 of them left together. When he entered, he casually arranged an identity for drunken Mo in the School of Mathematics, and the guard at the door did not ask much. Today's stargazing meeting was different from the usual banquets. There were dignitaries, officials and local officials. There were also many members of the royal family. There were also reserved seats for the colleges and the women's college. After they walked in, they were led to the designated seats. Since the academy's seats were closer to the front, he had already informed Li Xian in advance. Drunk Ink's seat was right next to him, and behind the 2 of them were a few teachers from the academy. Lord Li. After greeting the gentleman, the 2 of them sat down. There was still some time before the banquet started. Li Yi moved closer to her and whispered. He raised his head inadvertently and found a line of sight looking at him from the opposite side. The new capital governor, Xianxia, stared at the opposite side with his eyes wide open. He subconsciously wanted to stand up, but when he was halfway up he remembered something and sat back down. A person next to him asked in confusion, "Lord Tseng, what's wrong?" Xianxia shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I'm old. After sitting for a long time my waist is a little sore. I stand up and move around and it's much better." The man smiled and said, "Lord Tseng is in the prime of his life and is the mainstay of our court." "What are you talking about?" Of course Li Yi also saw Xianxia. He raised his wine glass and gestured. After Tsingzimo raised her head and looked at the opposite side, she instantly blushed. "His Majesty has arrived." A eunuch's shrill voice was heard. Everyone in the hall stood up and bowed. The old emperor looked good today. He was accompanied by the empress, and behind him were members of the royal family. Li Yi saw Li Xian and Prince Ning, who he hadn't seen for a long time. The arrogant Lolita was also inside, holding Yong Ning's little hand. She turned her head around and looked around restlessly. When she saw Li Yi, she happily winked at him. The emperor's banquet was only a symbol of benevolence. It was clearly impossible to eat one's fill and eat well at the small table in front of him. On both sides of the hall were officials, and in the middle there were palace maids dancing. In terms of etiquette and music, the royal family was the most interesting. Those palace maids were also selected from thousands of people. They were slim and beautiful, and even they were of the same height. Naturally, there was nothing to say about their appearance. Looking at their dance movements, there was a kind of classical beauty everywhere. It was an extremely wonderful visual enjoyment, but after looking at it for a long time, it was a little painful. "Where are you looking at?" "I'm looking at Lord Zheng. He's been looking at us." Li Yi rubbed the place where she had just pinched him and felt wronged. "Nonsense." She glanced at Li Yi and then put her hand back on him. But this time she didn't pinch him. Instead, she gently stroked him and asked in a low voice, "Does it hurt?" "It doesn't hurt." Li Yi shook his head and said, "But what I said just now is true. Lord Zheng is really looking at us. If you don't believe me, look." Zheng Zimo looked up and met a certain gaze. She immediately retracted her hand with a red face and lowered her head, no longer speaking. The highlight of the day was naturally not this meal but Li Xian's stargazing. Not long after, a eunuch stood up and announced that the Academy of Sciences would share the burden of the emperor. They had developed a divine object that could see the stars in the sky and correct the calendar. It could also replace the horse scouts and observe the enemy from the front. After a series of rewards for the Academy of Sciences were announced, the crowd was led out of the hall to see the true appearance of the moon and Mars. The old emperor took the lead and walked out of the hall, and the officials naturally followed. Just as Li Yi stood up, a voice came from behind. Sir, wait a minute." The proud Lolita ran over from behind while holding Yongning's hand. She looked at Li Yi and then at the Luo Shui goddess, who was disguised as a man, and a look of doubt appeared in her big eyes. "Sister Zimo." There was a period of time when Yongning was particularly clingy to her, but she recognized her at a glance. She hadn't seen the sister who could sing for her for a long time, so she ran over happily. A look of embarrassment appeared on Zheng Zimo's face and she was at a loss. She thought that she wouldn't be recognized when she was disguised as a man, but she didn't expect that she couldn't even fool a little girl of 6 or 7 years old. The proud Lolita was surprised for a moment, then ran over and shook her arm. So it's Sister Zimo. It's so fun, can you teach me how to dress as a man next time?" "Now it's Brother Zimo." Li Yi walked over and said, "All right, we'll talk about this later. Let's go outside and watch the show first. I didn't expect Mars to see so clearly." "That's right. So Yinghua is a ball just like the moon." "Lord Chen, make way, it's my turn to look." "Lord Su, didn't you see it just now?" "Don't waste everyone's time." Outside the hall, countless people surrounded a strange cylindrical object, pointing at it and discussing it. The stargazing event had started 3 days ago, and now it had long aroused the curiosity of everyone. Those who had already gone up to watch were all surprised and surrounded by the crowd, asking questions. Those who hadn't seen it felt like hundreds of claws were scratching their hearts, and they couldn't wait to go up immediately. "Mars." Cui Qingze looked at this scene and his face darkened slightly. A bad feeling welled up in his heart. Chapter 859. "It's too small, I can't see it clearly." Lord Wei's eyes are failing him, of course he can't see it clearly. "Let me see. Mars' position is indeed a ball, but where is the heart? Didn't they say that the star of misfortune rushed to the heart? I can't see it. Stop looking, we've been looking for a long time but we still can't find the heart." To the courtiers, the thing in front of them was really a strange thing. He could see things from afar so clearly, and Mars was hanging in the sky. Who would have thought that the flashing light in the sky that they usually saw at night was actually a ball? Seeing is believing. This was a concept that had existed since ancient times. Most of the people present firmly believed that the eyes could not deceive people. Moreover, a few old generals in the military had just said that the Academy of Sciences had already given the military one of these things. They called it the Eye of the Heavens, and it could even see the head of the enemy from a few miles away. Ambushes and traps were all useless under the Eye of the Heavens. The courtiers trusted the school of mathematics the most. Those who came out of it were all powerful people, and they were talents that the court fought over. As for the Academy of Sciences, they thought that it was something that the crown prince would play with for a few days on a whim and then abandon. However, no one expected that the thing that the Academy of Sciences came up with would cause a stir in the court several times. There was no need to mention the kite that could send people to the sky, the water wheel that could easily pump water from a low place to a high place, and the farming tools that could greatly simplify the plowing process. All of these things had invisibly changed their knowledge and even changed the lives of many people. Nowadays, for the farmers, cattle were no longer that important. As long as there was a strong laborer in the family coupled with the new farming tools, they could completely play the role of the cattle. This was enough to be called a groundbreaking event. His Majesty was so happy that he rewarded 100,000 taels of silver. After such a short period of time, the Academy of Sciences came up with such a magical device, and it was a great eye-opener for everyone. Of course, many people knew that today's event would not be as simple as looking at the stars. The matter of Mars guarding the heart had caused an uproar. Now there was a rumor among the people that Her Royal Highness was the Mars Bane. It was the princess who offended His Majesty. How could the Academy of Sciences not have any ulterior motives for holding a stargazing event at this time that involved a sensitive topic like Mars? Cui Qing's face was somewhat gloomy. He had already guessed the purpose of this stargazing. He glanced vaguely in a certain direction and the official nodded slightly. The telescope that was used to observe Mars was the one with the highest observation distance and the best quality. However, if it was used to observe the moon, it didn't have such high requirements. Apart from that one, there were a few others of slightly inferior quality, but they were more than enough to watch the moon. Sir, is there really no Chang'e on the moon? The proud Lolita ran over from afar. She had just seen the moon through that strange thing. That bumpy, ugly thing was not the moon she had imagined. The moon in her heart had Chang'e, the jade rabbit, and the beautiful osmanthus tree. The moon palace was not like that. Li Yi shook his head helplessly. The proud Lolita asked pitifully, "Is there no osmanthus tree or the moon palace?" Li Yi could only shake his head. "What about the jade rabbit?" "There should be a jade rabbit." Li Yi still shook his head. The proud Lolita was very sad. She threw herself into Li Yi's arms sadly and her tears were about to fall. Li Yi stroked her hair. Although it was indeed a little ruthless and cruel to burst a girl's dream, Xianxia had grown up. Compared with the cruel world she would recognize in the future, it was nothing at all. Her Royal Highness threw herself into the arms of a man. In the eyes of the other officials around, it was certainly a little unbelievable, but the situation in front of them was a little different. County Marquis Li was the master of Her Royal Highness, so his identity was naturally closer. His Majesty doted on the little princess the most. She was usually simple-minded, and when she was sad, it was inevitable that she would do something beyond the bounds of propriety. However, everyone deliberately ignored this scene. With His Majesty's love for her, even the censors did not dare to step forward to criticize her. The proud Lolita wiped the non-existent tears, secretly glanced at the master, and then secretly glanced at Brother Drunkard, next to him, and generously held the master's hand. He was sad just now, and sad people could have a little preferential treatment. In the field, Zhou Xian had already taken out a model of the sun and the moon and was fiddling with it. As for Earth, which was the land they were on, Li Yi did not allow him to tell the people present that the land they were stepping on was actually a ball. It was just that a board with the surname Fong was used to replace it. This was to avoid some unnecessary trouble. We know that the sun and the moon are both in the sky. After the sun sets, the moon rises, but this is not absolute. In fact, we often see the situation of the sun and the moon in the same sky, but because the sun is too strong we can't notice it. There were 3 people from the Academy of Sciences holding the model of the sun, the moon, and the earth respectively. Zhou Xian stood at the side and waved his hand. After the 3 people moved their positions according to the order of the sun, moon, and earth, they formed a straight line. When the moon runs to the middle of the earth and the sun, it will block a part of the sunlight, casting the shadow of the moon on the earth. People who are shrouded by the shadow of the moon can't see the sun that is blocked. This is what we call heavenly dog swallowing the sun. This principle was very easy to understand. In addition, there were 3 people there holding the model to demonstrate, and the 4th person lit a candle to simulate the sunlight. Indeed, a black shadow appeared on the earth. Someone stood on the earth and took a look and immediately came to a realization. So that's how it is. Li Yi glanced at the official. When Zhou Xian chose the actors, he was too sloppy. This acting was a little exaggerated. Although it was exaggerated, the principle was still the same. He didn't come up with any new theory. He just used the concept that everyone already had to explain the cause of the solar eclipse in a vivid manner. None of the people present were stupid. If they still couldn't figure it out, they wouldn't be here today. Li Xian waved his hand and the position of the three people changed again. Using the same principle, if the moon runs to the opposite side, and the earth is between the moon and the sun, then the moon will leave the earth's shadow. This is what we call heavenly dog swallowing the moon. The place suddenly became a little quiet. After listening to the Crown Prince's explanation, they were surprised to find that the principle was actually so simple. At the beginning, the Crown Prince had already used a very simple example to tell them that the moon itself couldn't shine. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a full moon and a half moon. Although this was contrary to their previous beliefs, the Crown Prince's reasoning was reasonable. They just needed to think about it for a while to understand it. After that, everything else was natural. Heavenly dog swallowing the sun, heavenly dog swallowing the moon, heavenly dog. Even if they hadn't heard the Crown Prince's explanation, they still didn't believe it. If the sun and moon had already been swallowed by the heavenly dog, could it still spit them out? Wouldn't the heavenly dog find it disgusting to stutter so many times? A bunch of nonsense. This is simply a bunch of nonsense. Just as everyone lowered their heads in contemplation and the place became quiet, a voice suddenly rang out from the crowd. An old man walked out from the crowd and said loudly, "The book of history says that only when she is at peace, Juda is subverted, Xin is confused by wine, Bianguan is separated, Tianji is disturbed, Xia abandons Juxi. It is the new moon of the autumn season." The old man looked at Li Xian and said indignantly, "Every heavenly dog swallowing the sun means that the Son of Heaven doesn't cultivate virtue, and the heavens are warning. This is." Li Xian looked at him and asked. The old man said righteously, "I am the imperial astronomer." The book of history says? Li Xian looked at the imperial astronomer, took out 2 pieces of silver, one big and one small, and held them in his fist. He looked at the old man and asked, "Then did the book of history say that if I let go, which of the 2 pieces of silver in my hand will fall first?" Note: the imperial astronomer's superior is called the imperial astronomer. Chapter 860. It was within everyone's expectations that the imperial astronomer would stand up to refute the crown prince. Stargazing, divination, and calendar calculation had always been the duty of the imperial astronomer. The crown prince's words just now were reasonable and his demonstration was vivid. Even those who did not understand astrology would be convinced. However, this was tantamount to smashing the reputation of the imperial astronomer. In other words, it was destroying the faith of those who had devoted their lives to it. However, no one expected that after the imperial astronomer stood up, the crown prince did not refute him. The change was so fast that it was even a little confusing. Moreover, although the imperial astronomer was old, he was not muddle-headed. The difference between the 2 pieces of silver was so obvious. Surely he could not be mistaken? When it came to the issue of faith, the imperial astronomer could still be neither servile nor overbearing in front of the crown prince. He looked at the crown prince's hands and said, "Although the imperial annals did not say it, the crown prince should not think that this old man is muddle-headed. If your highness let go at the same time, the heavier silver will naturally fall first." Dong. Li Xian let go of his hands. The 2 pieces of silver fell to the ground and also hit the old imperial astronomer's heart. The surrounding officials were also in an uproar. This did not make sense. Could there be a trap? The imperial astronomer did not believe it. He picked up the 2 pieces of silver, weighed them and tried them with his own hands. He then took out 2 pieces of different sizes and tried them again. He murmured, "How could this be? How could this be?" Not far away, Prince Ning smiled and said a few words in Emperor Jing's ear. Emperor Jing was slightly surprised, but a smile also appeared on his face. "This child." Zheng Zimo pulled on Li Yi's sleeve and asked curiously, "Why?" Li Yi turned his head and glanced at her. He said, "I can't explain it in a short time. When we go home tonight I will explain it to you slowly." Ahem. Not far behind the 2, the capital governor, Lord Zheng, coughed heavily. An official next to him asked doubtfully, "Lord Zheng, are you not feeling well?" Xing Shichen waved his hand. "I caught a cold yesterday. It's fine, it's fine." On the other hand, the imperial astronomer stood rooted to the spot in a daze, forgetting even to pick up the silver tails that had fallen to the ground. When he heard the discussions around him, he finally came back to his senses. Suppressing the shock and confusion in his heart, he immediately said, "These two matters cannot be lumped together." This old man was talking about the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse. "What you just said is simply a bunch of nonsense, a bunch of nonsense." Li Xian cupped his hands politely and said, "Since the imperial astronomer thinks what I just said is nonsense, why don't you point out where I'm wrong?" Li Xian am all ears. The officials nodded in agreement at the crown prince's attitude. This was the bearing and demeanor that a member of the royal family should have. Even when he was being criticized, he was still able to maintain such a state of mind. It was truly rare. If even the esteemed crown prince was like this, then the imperial astronomer's attitude immediately put him at a disadvantage. You're wrong." The imperial astronomer opened his mouth, but only managed to utter these few words. He only knew that the crown prince was definitely wrong and definitely would be wrong, but he simply could not point out where exactly he was wrong. What the crown prince had said just now was so reasonable, and that demonstration was so vivid and clear. How could the imperial astronomer find any mistakes? After opening his mouth a few times, he waved his hand and said loudly, "A bunch of nonsense, simply a bunch of nonsense." Li Xian continued to ask politely, "Since it's nonsense, may I trouble the imperial astronomer to tell me where the nonsense is?" "In short, a bunch of nonsense." "My lord, you're being a little unreasonable." Li Xian was not the only one who thought that the imperial astronomer was being unreasonable. Most of the people present felt the same way. Even if the crown prince was wrong, as long as the imperial astronomer gave a basis, everyone would be able to come to a conclusion. However, it was obvious that the crown prince had always been reasonable and polite. The imperial astronomer only understood the words "a load of nonsense." It was obvious that the imperial astronomer was being a little unreasonable. The smile on Li Xian's face had already disappeared. He looked at the old man and said coldly, "I'm trying to reason with you. If you continue to be unreasonable, the Academy of Sciences and the crown prince's residence will not be so easily bullied." The old man shuddered when he looked at him, but he suddenly laughed maniacally and said, "I remember now. You just said that the lunar eclipse was the shadow cast by the Earth on the moon. In that case, the shadow of the Earth on the moon should be extremely square, so why is it curved?" The moment these words were spoken, the entire place fell silent once again. Many people thought about it and nodded slightly. The imperial astronomer's words made a lot of sense. If the crown prince could not explain, then his previous judgment was very questionable. A thoughtful expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He nodded and said, "What you said makes sense." A smile appeared on the imperial astronomer's face. "So you admit that you're talking nonsense?" Li Xian thought for a moment, then said, "It's all thanks to the imperial astronomer's reminder. Since the sun is round, the moon is round, and even Mars is round, and all the stars we see with this object are round, why can't our Earth be round in the same starry sky?" He suddenly clapped his hands and said in sudden realization, "That's right, no wonder the shadow of the Earth on the moon is curved. No wonder we can only see far by climbing high. No wonder the horizon is also curved when standing by the sea. No wonder we always see the mast before the hull of the ship when sailing from the sea. Perhaps the Earth beneath our feet is also a big ball?" The imperial astronomer stood where he was, the crown prince's words echoing in his mind. Then there was a buzz. "Hee, a bunch of nonsense, a bunch of nonsense. Misleading people with lies, this is misleading people with lies. Fiend star, so you're the fiend star, fiend star." Li Xian looked at the crazed imperial astronomer and waved his hand. "Take this lord away to rest." No one cared about the mad imperial astronomer anymore. Their minds were filled with the words that the crown prince had just said. The imperial astronomer's words not only enlightened the crown prince, but also made them think deeply. During an eclipse, the Earth's shadow, the sails of ships sailing from the sea. If the Earth was flat, why would one need to climb high to look far away? The sun, the moon, Mars. Why had they never thought about these things? The crown prince was really quick-witted. Among the crowd, Cui Qing's expression could no longer be described as gloomy. Meanwhile, Li Xian clapped his hands and continued his explanation. "Now that we're done with the solar and lunar eclipses, let's talk about Mars guarding the heart. Just now, everyone saw that there's nothing around Mars. There's not much difference between using Mars to look at Xianxia and using our eyes to look at Xianxia. This is because Xianxia is too far away from us. It's like two objects that are separated from each other. When we look at it from afar, we'll think that they're very close to each other. Xianxia is so far away from us that what we see is 500. Cough. Li Xian turned around and looked at Li Yi with disappointment. Then he turned back and said, in short, Mars and Xianxia will never meet each other. Therefore the saying that Mars guards the heart while the jinx rushes to Xianxia is nonsense. Anyone who uses this to slander the royal family has ulterior motives. He sighed and said, compared to the vast starry sky, we're so tiny. Who knows that when we look up at the starry sky, what we see is just the passing of the starry sky. Cough. Cough. Li Yi covered his mouth and coughed twice. Beside him, the Luo Shui goddess asked with concern, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Should we go back earlier? The proud Lolita also looked nervous. Sir isn't feeling well. I'll ask my father to summon the imperial physician. Li Yi grabbed her hand tightly and didn't let her run away. He shook his head and said, I'm fine. It's just that my throat was a little itchy. I'm fine now. A hint of pain appeared on the proud Lolita's face. She looked up at Li Yi pitifully and whispered, Sir, you're hurting me. I'm sorry. Li Yi hurriedly let go of her hand. On the other side, Li Xian had already finished his scientific activity. He pointed to the telescope at the side and said with a smile, today's stargazing will end here. If anyone still wants to see the full picture of Mars, please go ahead. As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd surged towards a certain direction. Chapter 861. The Stargazing Conference opened the eyes of all the officials and nobles present. His Royal Highness convinced people with reason, crushed the imperial astronomer unilaterally, and completely overturned the rumors that had been circulating for hundreds of years. This was not the first time that the Academy of Sciences had subverted tradition. Even people could grow wings and fly to the sky, which proved that the heavenly hound that they didn't believe in actually existed. This was also within the range of their psychological tolerance. As for the fact that the ground under their feet was actually a big ball, for a while some people still found it difficult to accept. But His Royal Highness's arguments were sufficient, and even if they wanted to refute, they didn't know where to start. Just the matter of a heavy object falling to the ground was enough to make them think for a long time. Antares guarding the heart was a jinx, and the rumor of His Majesty naturally fell apart. After today, if anyone dared to use this matter to make a fuss, it would mean that they had ulterior motives and intended to slander the eldest princess, who had made great contributions to the country. His Majesty would not easily forgive such bad behavior. The banquet came to an end. Emperor Jing and the Empress got up, and the officials gradually dispersed. Although there were some waves in the middle, today's stargazing conference could be regarded as successful. Li Yi was very glad that he finally came to see. Otherwise, he would have been ruined by Li Xian, who couldn't control his mouth when he was happy. Let's go back too. Li Yi turned his head and said. Zheng Zimo nodded gently. At this time, a female official came around from behind and whispered, Master Li, the eldest princess has been waiting for you outside for a long time. Zheng Zimo looked at him and said, You go first, I will wait for you here. Li Yi shook his head and said, Let's go together. There should be nothing important, so we can go out together. The eldest princess had been accompanying the Empress and Princess Ning today. Li Yi saw her, but he was a little far away and didn't say much. She was going back to the palace at night. When Li Yi walked out of the hall, he saw her waiting in the corridor on the left from a distance. Li Yi walked over, first tilted his head to look at Zheng Zimo and introduced, This is, I know. Emingzu nodded slightly to her, Miss Zheng. Your Highness. Zheng Zimo bowed to her. No need to be so polite. She shook her head and pointed ahead. It's getting late. Let's talk as we walk. She didn't say anything about the cross-dressing goddess of Luo Shui, nor did she ask anything about it. As a result, Li Yi didn't even have the chance to explain himself. She walked in front, and after a few steps she looked back at Li Yi and said, You've worked hard for this matter. What are you talking about? Li Yi shook his head. Moreover, the one who's really suffering is Li Xian. If we don't let him say what he wants to say, it must be very uncomfortable. After tonight, the Cui family shouldn't be able to cause any more waves. Are you sure the Cui family is behind this? What else? Li Yi waved his hand and said, Don't worry too much. After this time they have almost no other tricks to play. However, we still need to be on guard. After all, a cornered dog will jump over the wall and a cornered rabbit will bite. In the next 2 days there should be some rebound, but you don't have to worry about this. Tonight's stargazing gathering was only to shut the mouths of the discerning people in the court. The most important thing was the ordinary people who didn't know the truth and were easily incited by evil people. After today they must strike while the iron is hot and completely reverse the public opinion. Then, if you need anything, just tell me. She looked back again and boarded an extremely luxurious carriage. I'm leaving. Li Yi waved to her. Fong and the sloppy old man had returned, and the carriage was parked not far away. The two of them had roasted chicken in one hand and fine wine in the other, leaning against the carriage and chatting enthusiastically against the moon. Li Yi was about to walk over, but Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, "Anyway, it's not far. Let's walk back." Li Yi waved to Fong, who was driving the carriage, and the carriage slowed down. It didn't get too close and hung far behind them. Zheng Zimo looked in the direction where the carriage disappeared and murmured, "It's really not easy for a woman like the eldest princess to govern such a large country like this." Yes. Li Yi nodded. If she gave birth to a man, she would definitely be emperor material. Zheng Zimo tilted her head and glanced at him. You're the one who doesn't want her to give birth to a man, right? Li Yi thought about it carefully and felt that he really couldn't accept it. He looked at her again and said, "It's fine if she's a man, but it's also a different feeling for a woman to dress up as a man." He reached out and pinched her chin. "Come, little brother, give me a smile." A figure walked out of a shop on the side of the street. A smile had just appeared on her face and she was about to greet him, but she quickly retracted her arm halfway. Li Yi looked at Lin Wanru, who had walked out of the shop. Lin Wanru stood on the steps and looked at him. "Well, I'll take a look and go back later." She turned around and walked into the boutique again. Goddess Luo Shui blushed. After glaring at him, she quickly ran in. "Miss Lin, wait a minute. It's not what you think." When they walked back together, Lin Wanru looked at him apologetically and said, "I'm sorry, I just thought." Li Yi shook his head. He couldn't blame her. After all, when Zheng Zimo was dressed as a man, she looked like a slightly androgynous young man. Whether it was men or women, she was very attractive. The scene just now appeared in her mind. She turned to look at Li Yi and asked, "You have?" Li Yi knew what she was asking. He nodded and said, "We just need a suitable time to welcome her in." "Then does Sister Lu know?" Li Yi nodded. "No wonder." Lin Wanru nodded and then asked, "Miss Ruoqing, you should also." "Ruoqing?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "There are still 2 more opportunities." Then, no more. Li Yi waved his hand again and again. He didn't see it before. Why was Miss Lin so curious? He immediately changed the topic and said, "It's so late. What are you doing in the shop?" Lin Wanru turned around and said, "Today I investigated some customers who were used to buying ready-made clothes in the shop, and then I helped them with the accounts. There are still a few opportunities." A few steps behind the two, Lin Yong counted with his fingers. When he raised his head, he let out a long sigh. The Tui family. When a maidservant went in to serve tea, she held her breath. After leaving the room, she wiped the cold sweat from her forehead and quickly ran away. In the hall, Tui Ching's face was extremely gloomy. He picked up the tea in front of him and drank it all in one gulp. However, because the tea was too hot, he spat it out again. His face turned red and he slammed the teacup on the ground. The teacup shattered and the tea splashed everywhere. Beside him, Tui Qingming asked in disbelief, "That imperial astronomer has really been driven crazy? Is there no one else in the imperial astronomer who has come forward?" Tui Qingzi slapped the table and said angrily, "Who would have thought that the thing in the Academy of Sciences could even be seen by Yinghua? That ball is clearly hanging there. Everyone has seen it. How can the imperial astronomer argue with him?" Tui Qingming looked dispirited. "But our arrangements these days. Those old foxes in the court can't be counted on." Tui Qingzi waved his hand and said, "While the matter of the stargazing conference hasn't spread, let's add some fuel to the fire. After doing so much, there has to be some splash." Tui Qingming nodded and said, "I'll arrange it right now." After Tui Qingzi sat down, he asked again, "Where's Qing Duo? Why didn't I see him last night?" Tui Qingming said, "Qing Duo went out to drink with his friends. The Chu family still needs to be maintained. He has a good relationship with the second son of the Chu family. In the evening he met a few friends and it seems that he went to the Drunken Moon restaurant." Tui Qingzi nodded and his face looked a little better. Qing Duo is quite sensible to think of this. All right, you can go back to your work. After Cui Qingming left, Cui Qingze walked out of the room and asked, "What is Madame doing at night?" A maid at the door immediately replied, "Madame said that she was not feeling well, so she went back to her room early to rest." Cui Qingze nodded again and his heart immediately felt much better. At the same time, in a room somewhere in the Cui residence, a charming woman sat on the bed looking sullen. Didn't he just drink with someone the day before yesterday? Why did he go again? It's a rare opportunity and he wasted it. Chapter 862. After New Year's Eve, the bustling scene in the capital city did not diminish but increased. Before New Year's Eve, the ordinary people in the capital city were busy celebrating the new year. The officials who came from other places did not dare to slack off in the slightest for the first day of the imperial court. After New Year's Eve, they would visit their relatives and friends for a few more days. At the very least, he would leave after the Lantern Festival and tour the capital from top to bottom once. It was no wonder that the foreigners had not seen the world. Today's capital city was changing day by day. It was very different from what they remembered in the past. There were many interesting places, but they could not see enough. In these few days, the big and small shops in the capital city, as well as the peddlers and merchants, made a lot of money. The ready-made clothes and underwear shops were often sold out as soon as the goods were put on display. The brothels were overcrowded every day. If it was only the capital city, the demand for goods would not be so great. Among them, there were many businessmen from other places and even foreign countries. They would transport the goods they bought from the capital city back and resell them to make a profit. This also made Li Yi increasingly feel that he should not stay in the capital city. As long as there was a brothel, the family's shops would flourish everywhere. He would not give the black-hearted middlemen a chance to make a profit. Li Yi sat on the bed and carried the little guy who was about to fall back. After 2 months, the little guy became active. He crawled around on the bed and wanted to grab anything he saw. When he cried, his voice became louder. Rui and he were tortured at night. Rui had just coaxed him to sleep in the morning and was forced to the room by Li Yi to rest. After a while, the little guy woke up again. He was full of energy and seemed to be full of energy. Li Yi just sat on the bed and thought about something. The little guy did not know when he fell asleep again. He asked Xiao Huan to come over and look after him. Other than Rui, only Xiao Huan hugged him and he would not cry no matter how long it took. When he walked out of the door, he happened to see the sloppy old man limping in from the outside. Although Su was older, he was still a guru. The number of people in the world who could hurt him could be counted on one hand. It was even more impossible for him to sprain his ankle while walking. It was because he had made some progress in martial arts recently. It seemed that he had made a small breakthrough in his realm, so he excitedly challenged his second granduncle. After he came out of the courtyard, he became like this. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Su should rest at home today. I'll ask Feng to go out with me." The old man was already in such a state, yet he still wanted to trouble him to accompany him. It would be suspicious if he was abusing the old man. It doesn't matter. The sloppy old man shook his head and said, "The path of martial arts has always been bumpy. This small injury is nothing." Li Yi leaped up and landed steadily on the carriage. The sloppy old man glanced at him and said with some surprise, "You've made some progress recently?" Li Yi lifted the curtain, turned around and said with a smile, "I ate well, slept well and was in a good mood. I accidentally entered a little. There was never a lack of topics in the capital city. As the people under the feet of the emperor, the people of the capital city had pride and confidence that people in other places did not have. They cared about the state affairs, the gossip of the officials and nobles in the capital city, whether the soldiers on the front line had enough to eat, and they were also curious about how the third master of the Cui family was better than the first master of the Cui family, especially for some people who had a strong sense of national pride. Although they were just ordinary people, they cared about the country no less than the officials in the court. However, it was also because they were only ordinary people who could not participate in the state affairs that some news could not be obtained. Therefore, the brothel became the favorite place for these people. In the past 2 days, the contents of the stargazing meeting that had been widely spread were what people were most interested in. On the stage, an old storyteller was describing with great emotion how His Highness had wittily dealt with the imperial astronomer that night, and how the wronged imperial astronomer had pestered him endlessly. Below the stage, many people were intoxicated by the story, and there were also people who lowered their heads and discussed in whispers. A young man said in surprise, "What? 2 pieces of silver with a huge difference in weight fell from the same height and fell to the ground at the same time. Shouldn't the heavier one fall first? This is too unimaginable. A young man beside him smiled and said, if this brother doesn't believe it, you can take out 2 pieces of silver and try it. You will immediately know whether what he said is true or false. Brother, what you said is reasonable. The young man nodded and took out an ingot of silver and a silver fragment from his waist. He stood up, raised them to the same height and let go at the same time. The 2 pieces of silver fell too fast and he could not see which one fell first. But this was far from what he had imagined, that the silver ingot should fall earlier than the silver fragment. An expression of disbelief appeared on his face. It's actually true. The young man beside him picked up the 2 pieces of silver on the ground and put them in his bosom. He said, although it's a little unimaginable, seeing is believing. We have always been wrong. Yes, I didn't expect that we would be wrong for so many years when we could easily verify the truth. The young man nodded and sighed inwardly. He then looked at him with a frown. That's my silver. What, yours? I clearly picked it up. In another restaurant, a green-robed scholar was talking loudly, attracting the attention of the onlookers in the restaurant. What stargazing meeting? They actually said that the earth under our feet is a big ball. This is ridiculous, a bunch of nonsense. The green-robed scholar spoke passionately. He drank a cup of wine and said again, the heavenly dog swallows the sun and the heavenly dog swallows the moon. The sages have long explained this. Could it be that we scholars have been reading the sages' books all along have been wrong? Since ancient times, there has never been a woman in charge of the government. She abandoned the moral principles and ignored them. That's why there are bewilderment guarding the heart and warning the celestial phenomena. Now, someone actually wants to use such a twisted theory to cover up the past. What is his motive? What is his motive? If Her Majesty insists on doing this, the country will fall, the country will fall. We scholars. In the restaurant, some people listened excitedly, some people looked thoughtful, and some people's eyes flashed with suspicion. Fong drank a mouthful of wine and said angrily, young master, this guy is full of nonsense. Why don't you arrest him and put him in prison? Li Yi shook his head and did not speak. The sloppy old man tore a chicken leg and said lightly, the Jing kingdom does not convict people based on words. The emperor is muddle-headed and the officials and the people can be scolded. These scholars are the most united. If you arrest one of them, countless more will appear. In this way the world will be in chaos. Fong slapped the table and said, is there no way to deal with him? As soon as he finished speaking, there was a noise at the door. Hey, where did the beggar come from? You can't go in here. I want to find my husband. My husband is inside. What do you mean by your husband? Go, go, go. I'll give you a bun. Go quickly. My husband will be the top scholar in the future. I want to see him. Top scholar? The waiter was slightly stunned when he heard the ragged woman's words. The woman took this opportunity to break in. She quickly walked to the green-robed scholar, grabbed his sleeve and said excitedly, husband, I finally found you. She pulled out a 5 or 6-year-old girl behind her and quickly said, young man, hurry up and greet daddy. Chapter 863. The little girl raised her head and looked at the young man. She blinked her big watery eyes and said timidly, daddy. The scholar in sign shirt was talking with his saliva flying everywhere. He had already thought that after this matter he would probably have a way to become an official. He was stunned by the sudden scene in front of him. When he came to his senses, he saw the ragged woman pulling his sleeve. He immediately waved his hand in disgust and said angrily, you must have mistaken me for someone else. Who is your husband? The woman pushed the messy hair off her forehead and said hurriedly, husband, don't you know me? I'm Yang. The young scholar's face changed. Was it really a love affair that he had gotten into on his way to school? But he couldn't remember when he had a love affair with this woman named Yang. Now he had a family and his wife's family had some power in the capital city. Usually he relied on his father-in-law to help him. Even if he really had a love affair with her, he couldn't admit it at this time. He suddenly shook his sleeve and said loudly, I don't know you. You must have mistaken me for someone else. The woman was stunned and looked at him in a daze. The excitement on her face gradually disappeared and her face turned gray. In order to find you, I took young man on the road for a year. When we finally arrived at the capital city, young man was seriously ill. If it weren't for a kind-hearted person, she would have. she said in a desolate voice. I know you already have a family in the capital city. I won't disturb you anymore. I will raise young man alone. The little girl looked up at the young scholar with tears in her big eyes. Mother, father doesn't want us anymore. The woman wiped away her tears and said, Young man, I mistook you for someone else. Go. I'll take you to find your real father. After saying that, she took the little girl's hand and left without looking back. In the restaurant, the young scholar stood there in a daze. Looking at the disgust in the eyes of the people around him, he opened his mouth, but in the end he didn't say anything and left gloomily. He looks like a dog, but I didn't expect him to be such a cruel and unscrupulous person. She's just like Chin Shimmy from the drama. I thought that story only existed in dramas. I didn't expect, abandoning his wife and son, yet he is still a scholar. Does he deserve to be called a scholar? He only knows how to read the book of the sage. Is that all the sage taught him? That woman is so pitiful. Her words just now clearly showed that she had already given up all hope. It's really a pity for this mother and son. After the azure-robed scholar left, the people in the restaurant became filled with righteous indignation. In their hearts, the words of a scholar still carried some weight. These people read the book of the sage and preached great principles. However, what principles could a beast in human attire, who could even abandon his wife and son, say? One of them shook his head and said, Her Royal Highness has never paid attention to such slander. Her Royal Highness only cares about the people of our Jing country. These days, how many new laws have been implemented, how many people can afford to eat, and how many people can afford to study. They don't even think about how much their wives and children have received from Her Royal Highness. These people are cruel and unscrupulous, unscrupulous and unscrupulous. Another person said indignantly, If this is a jinx, then I hope that there will be more jinxes like this in our Jing nation. In the restaurant, many people revealed ashamed expressions. Just now, when they heard that heartless and unscrupulous person speak so eloquently, they almost believed him. Among them, how many of them had benefited from Her Highness? Not only did they not repay her kindness, but they even helped some people with ulterior motives to slander her. This was ungrateful. Bah! Fong spat out a chicken bone and scolded, Scum! Then a puzzled expression appeared on his face and he asked, Son-in-law, do you feel that the woman just now is a little familiar? Not very familiar. Li Yi nodded, stood up and said, Let's go and have a look at other places. At the entrance of a tea house, the waiter stopped Li Yi and the other two people and said with a smile, Sir, this place is booked by someone today. Casually catching an ingot of silver that Fong threw over, the waiter immediately smiled brightly and said, Sir, please come in. There were many figures in the tea house. Most of them were young people dressed like scholars. They were probably holding a poetry meeting or something like that. Some were writing while others were commenting loudly. Now that the emperor is ill, the eastern palace is empty and women are in power, the rules are in chaos. The weather is warning us, but the court is ignoring it. I really don't know where the future of our Jing kingdom lies. Someone in the tea house frowned. Today everyone was making friends through literature. Although the young people were full of ambition, it was inevitable that they would discuss the affairs of the country. However, the matter of Yinghua guarding his heart had already been concluded. The imperial astronomer had made disrespectful remarks about Her Highness the Princess and intended to bring chaos to the court. He had already taken the blame and resigned. Almost all the officials in the court had seen Yinghua with their own eyes. What was the intention of this scholar with the surname Wang to make such remarks at this time? The people of my generation who study. The scholar with the surname Wang had only just started his sentence when he was interrupted by a voice. A plump woman with heavy makeup barged in from outside. Behind her were a few sturdy men. She scolded, Bullsh *T scholars. Don't you scholars have to pay when you visit prostitutes? The scholar with the surname Wang's expression changed. He quickly walked forward and whispered, Didn't I say that in 2 days? Bah! The old brothel keeper waved her hand and said angrily, It's only right and proper to pay when visiting prostitutes. It's not easy for us to open our doors to do business. If you don't pay today, I'll drag you to see the officials. The scholar with the surname Wang couldn't care less about the current situation. He quickly said in a low voice, 2 days, just 2 days. You don't have money? The old brothel keeper glanced at him and waved her hand. Take him to see the officials. The few sturdy men behind her immediately rushed forward. The scholar with the surname Wang was quickly taken away, leaving the people in the tea house looking at each other in dismay. Scholars had been dissolute since ancient times. Visiting a brothel was nothing much. Could even be considered an elegant thing. However, visiting a brothel without paying was a bit too much. This kind of immoral person it was not worth associating with. Li Yi took a sip of tea. The tricks played by the Cui family were too obvious and too straightforward. There was no technical content at all. However, in terms of effectiveness, if the power of the brothel was not involved, there would really be some trouble. These scholars had always been the most provocative group. Their influence could not be underestimated. Fortunately, that Grand Tutor Chu did not collude with the Cui family this time. Otherwise, the matter would have become much more troublesome. When he came out of the tea house and was about to go to the brothel, he once again saw the young scholar he had met in the restaurant. He sat paralyzed in front of a tall mansion door and cried, "Wife, believe me, I really don't know them. This is a false accusation, a false accusation." A servant girl threw out a bag from inside and said in disgust, "Miss said to get lost far away. The next time I see you in the capital, I'll get someone to break your legs." After saying this, the mansion door closed with a bang. "Serves you right." Fong spat fiercely at the young man who had lost his soul. Those who are loyal are always those who butcher dogs, but those who are heartless are always those who are scholars. Li Yi shook his head and sighed. Then he walked to a brothel. A young girl who was biting on a tonghulu ran out and said happily, "Big brother, you're here." Li Yi patted her head and said with a smile, "Young man, did you listen to Sister watching today?" The young girl nodded vigorously. Young man has always been very obedient. She even performed on stage yesterday. Chapter 864. Fuma, take a closer look. It says that Qin Xianglian is 32 years old and is suing the emperor's son-in-law. Deceiving the king, deceiving the emperor, breaking off the marriage, killing his wife and son, losing his conscience. On the stage, an old man was singing passionately, and the audience was listening attentively. This was a new play that had been released not long ago. It was called The Case of the Beautiful Guillotine. It was about a heartless scholar who became the Zhuangyan and was recruited as the prince consort. He abandoned his first wife and for the sake of riches and fortune he wanted to kill his wife and son. As soon as this play was released, it became very popular in the capital. The fictional character of Justice Bao was no stranger to them. This story of how he didn't fear power and justice for the people and killed the wicked was very satisfying. It was exactly the kind of play that ordinary people living at the bottom of society liked to watch. At this critical juncture, if there really was a heartless person who abandoned his wife and son for the sake of wealth and honor, he would probably be stabbed in half by the audience. In the private room upstairs, Miss Singh wiped away her tears and looked at Li Yi with some bitterness. "Why did you come up with this play?" Needless to say, she, who was overflowing with sympathy, naturally sympathized with Qin Xianglian and her son. Wan Ruoqing was used to such scenes. She had seen this play countless times, from the script to the arrangement to the introduction of the stage. Naturally, she would not be touched at this time. She smiled and said, "This is just a play. If it wasn't so complicated and bizarre to stir people's emotions, not many customers would be willing to watch it." Zheng Zimo looked at her and curled her lips. "You only know how to speak up for him." Wan Ruoqing could only shake her head and smile. Li Yi looked at the goddess of Luo Shui and defended himself. Art comes from life, but it is higher than life. Although it is a play, it also reflects the reality of society. Today when I was eating in the restaurant, I saw a real-life Qin shimmy. "You are too naive and don't understand the ugliness of this world." He thought of something and said, "Oh right, if you have the chance, help me thank the Madam of the Jade Courtyard. If it wasn't for her this time, there might have been some trouble. She has never been someone who likes to suffer losses." Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, "I came here this morning to talk about the conditions. The new styles of the lingerie workshop will be supplied to them first." These were all unimportant matters. After the failure of the imperial astronomer, the Cui clan was still too naive to think that they could use these scholars to stir up the storm. They were but a plate of loose sand and their usefulness was very limited. He just didn't know what kind of tricks they would use next time after they failed again. It wasn't that they hadn't considered solving the problem once and for all. However, how could a family that had existed for hundreds of years in the Jing kingdom fall so easily? At the very least he needed a heavy primer. Trash, all of you are trash. In a hall of the Cui clan, a row of young scholars knelt down. The head of the Cui clan, Xianxia, could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. His expression was ferocious and he roared incessantly. The people kneeling in the hall lowered their heads, not even daring to breathe loudly. All the arrangements he had made without exception had failed. They didn't even stir up the slightest ripple. On the contrary, because of these things, the public opinion of the people had been completely reversed. In this invisible confrontation, the Cui clan had once again suffered a crushing defeat. Standing to the side, Cui Qingming looked at the trembling people, waved his hand and said, "All of you leave." As if they had been granted amnesty, they hurriedly got up from the ground and disappeared from the hall in an instant. Cui Qing's whole body slumped on the chair. His eyes were lifeless and his expression was dispirited. "Big brother." Cui Qingming had just opened his mouth when he was interrupted. Cui Qing's stared blankly ahead and murmured, "Qingming, do you think we're getting further and further away from that path?" Cui Qingming clenched his fists and said through gritted teeth, "Her Highness is still here and His Highness is still here. We haven't lost and the Cui clan hasn't lost. We lost miserably yesterday. Chu Ping, you're the only one who won the most. No matter what, you have to pay for today's match, right?" In the Miaoyin pavilion, a young man put his arm around another young man's shoulder and said with a smile, "Of course." Chu Ping nodded and then said in a low voice, "However, you mustn't let my grandfather know that we went to the gambling house." Cui Xixin patted him on the chest and said, "Of course we know that. Don't worry, if the Grand Tutor finds out, won't we also be punished?" Only then did Chu Ping relax. He touched the banknotes in his bosom and felt a burst of joy in his heart. The Chu family had a strict upbringing. Although he was the eldest son of the first wife, because of this, the elders were even stricter with him. Previously, he had traveled with his grandfather to broaden his horizons. Now that he had returned to the capital and was accompanied by his friends, he finally realized that there were so many fun things in this world. Come, let's go in first." Cui Xixin waved his hand and pointed at Qin Yu, who was at the side. As he walked, he said, "I heard from Junliang that you also like that kind of thing, Chu Ping. You can talk more with little Duke Qin about this. I believe you will learn a lot from him." Chu Ping's face reddened and he hurriedly said, "Let's go in and talk." A well-rounded woman came out from inside and smiled. "Oh, my young masters, you came at such a good time today. Lady Xuanxuang is preparing to perform in the heavenly room upstairs." Chu Ping asked in confusion, "Lady Xuanxuang?" Cui Xixin smiled and explained, "Lady Xuanxuang's zither skills are the best in the wonderful sound pavilion. If you go up and listen, you'll know. You have a deep understanding of the zither. Perhaps you can even compare notes with Lady Xuanxuang." The wonderful sound pavilion was one of the more famous music halls in the capital. Normally, there was an endless stream of customers. The group went up to the second floor. Under the guidance of the beautiful woman, they entered the heavenly room. The room was very spacious and there were many small rooms inside. There were bead curtains hanging from the outside, forming a ring around the stage in the middle. At this time, there was already a woman on the stage. She was about 16 or 17 years old and was very charming and lovely. However, her face was a bit pale. At first glance, she gave off a feeling of weakness. Whenever a man saw her appearance, he couldn't help but want to take her into his arms and take good care of her. Cui Xixin stretched out his hand and waved it in front of Chu Ping's eyes. He smiled and said, "Hey, what are you looking at? You're staring straight." "No, nothing." Chu Ping's face reddened and he lowered his head in a panic. "Could it be that this Lady Xuanxuang is your type?" Cui Xixin looked at him in astonishment and said, "Last time Junliang told me, I didn't believe it. So it turns out that you really do like this sickly appearance. But..." He shook his head with a bit of pity. "But what?" Chu Ping immediately raised his head. "This Lady Xuanxuang is a good woman. It is said that her family isn't very well off and her body is also very weak. She only occasionally plays a song here. I'm afraid you'll be disappointed this time." Cui Xixin's words contained a bit of regret that was difficult to conceal. Although the wonderful sound pavilion was a music hall, it was also a business of secret prostitution. Of course, this place was naturally of a much higher class than the brothels outside. There were also simple musicians and this Lady Xuanxuang was one of them. His tone changed and he said again, A fair and graceful lady is a gentleman's desire. If you Chu Ping really like her, then boldly pursue her. With the Chu family's noble status, it is not impossible for you to obtain Lady Shuangshuang's heart. At this moment the sound of the zither rang out. Chu Ping closed his eyes and listened attentively for a while. Then he opened his eyes and said in admiration, Lady Shuangshuang's zither skills can already be considered a master. Cui Shixin patted his shoulder and said, Don't be sad. In a moment I'll arrange another one for you. Isn't she just the sickly type? As long as you have money you can find anything. However, don't even think about the one who let us in just now. That's young Duke Qin's. Chu Ping looked at the beautiful woman from just now and immediately shook his head. He sighed in his heart. This young Duke Qin's preferences were truly unique. Chapter 865. Inside the heaven room, the music of the zither was pleasing to the ears. Aside from this music there was no other noise. After all, those who could come here to listen to music were at least semi-refined people. They wouldn't do something like burning the zither and cooking the crane. Cui Shixin saw Chu Ping staring at the zither-playing woman in a daze. He smiled and whispered, If you really like it, how about tonight? Chu Ping repeatedly shook his head and said, No, this absolutely cannot be done. You must not. Cui Shixin waved his hand and said, I was just saying. Don't worry, how could we dare to help you do such a thing? If the Grand Tutor were to find out, it would be terrible. What kind of people are you talking about? Don't think that I don't know what kind of place your wonderful sound pavilion is. An abrupt voice suddenly sounded from one of the compartments. The beautiful woman from before was pushed out from the inside. She said with a troubled expression, Customer, we cannot agree to your request. Slap. A middle-aged man swayed out from inside and slapped the beautiful woman's face. He scolded, You're a whore and you still want to maintain a chastity? Don't be so shameless. A man pulled the middle-aged man and said, Fifth Lord, you've drunk too much. Let's go back. I didn't drink too much. The middle-aged man waved his hand and pointed at the delicate woman on the stage. He said, That? Lady Shuangshuang, come down and drink a cup of wine with Fifth Lord. Fifth Lord is in a good mood today. If you make Fifth Lord happy, you will be heavily rewarded. The woman stood up from the stage and ran to the beautiful woman's side in a panic. She helped her up and asked with concern, Anton, are you all right? I'm fine. The beautiful woman covered her face, but she still smiled at the middle-aged man and said, Guest Shuangshuang is truly a pure woman. If you like her, I can find another. The middle-aged man slapped her again and drunkenly said, I'm giving you face but you don't want it. The woman quickly pushed the beautiful woman behind her and said in panic, I'll drink with you. The middle-aged man revealed a smile and reached out to touch her small face. That's more obedient. The woman didn't expect him to be so touchy. She subconsciously dodged and whispered, You please behave yourself. The middle-aged man's face instantly darkened. He slapped her face again and said angrily, You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. Do you know who I am? The young girl's body was thin and weak to begin with. After receiving such a heavy slap, she staggered and almost fell to the ground. When she raised her head, her eyes were filled with tears, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. From the surrounding cubicles, figures started to walk out one after another. Usually, the majority of those who had such an interest were naturally young people. Moreover, they were young and full of vigor. When they saw injustice, they would always stand up and speak out. Immediately, many people had resentful expressions on their faces as they walked over. A figure was the fastest. After running over, he first helped the woman up and asked with concern, Miss, are you all right? The woman looked at him and nodded gratefully, Thank you, young master, I'm fine. And who are you? The middle-aged man seemed to be angered by the scene in front of him. He reached out to pull the young man's shoulder, but his wrist was caught midway. Qin Yu suddenly swung his hand and looked at the middle-aged man in front of him. The middle-aged man staggered and looked at the young man in front of him. His expression suddenly changed and he seemed to have sobered up. He blurted out, Why are you here? Qin Yu didn't even look at him and said lightly, I'll count to 3. If you don't scram, I'll get someone to help you. The middle-aged man's expression changed again and he said in a low voice, This is outside. You should at least give me some face and leave some face for the Qin family. 3. I'm your 5th uncle. 2. You don't even care about the Qin family's face? 1. The middle-aged man didn't move, but the big man behind him suddenly carried him and quickly ran to the stairs. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared in front of everyone. Chu Ping looked at Qin Yu in disbelief and murmured, "This? Boring." Qin Yu waved his hand and said, "You guys have fun, I'll leave first." Chu Ping was stunned for a moment, then he looked at the woman and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" The delicate woman bowed to him and said gratefully, "Thank you for saving me just now, young master." "I can't thank you enough." Chu Ping looked at her face and hurriedly said, "You're bleeding, quickly go and apply some medicine." The beautiful woman squeezed out a smile and said, "Thank you for today's matter, young masters. Please sit here for a while, I'll let Xianxia come out later to properly thank you, young masters." The song just now was not finished. After such a thing happened, the beautiful woman quickly arranged for a musician to replace it. However, the people who had already sat back in their rooms didn't have much mood to enjoy it. In a compartment somewhere, someone said in surprise, "The one who used alcohol to act crazy was the Qin family's fifth master?" A person nodded and said, "He just called himself young Duke Qin's fifth uncle. It should be true." That person was puzzled. Then why did Qin fifth master treat him? The person who just answered looked at him in surprise and asked, "You don't know?" That person was even more puzzled. "What do I know?" After a while, after listening to his companion next to him explain what had happened, he opened his eyes wide and said in disbelief, "No way, after doing such an immoral thing he can actually act like this." Someone who knew the situation shook his head and said, "This matter caused a great stir in the capital city, even the Qin family couldn't suppress it. Later, it should be the Cui family and His Highness King of Shu who helped to suppress the matter with great difficulty. In that case, this Qin family's fifth master can be considered a pitiful person." That person showed a look of pity and said, "This is simply a great shame. He must hate the Qin family, the Cui family and His Highness King of Shu to death. What's the use of hating him? What can he do? Among these people, who can he afford to offend?" Someone sighed and said, "It is also because of this matter that this Qin family's fifth master only knows how to drink and have fun all day, drowning his sorrows in alcohol. At first he went to the brothel every day, but recently he seems to like going to the brothel to watch the shows. After suffering such a great shame, he can still appear in front of everyone openly. He can be considered an anomaly." The one who just stood up seems to be the young master of the Chu family. As expected of someone taught by old Chu. In another room, Chu Ping asked worriedly, "Qin Yu, he treated his elders like this. Is he okay?" Cui Shixin waved his hand and said, "This is nothing. He has done things 10 times or even 100 times worse than this. You don't have to worry." He looked at Chu Ping with a smile and said, "How does it feel to be a hero saving the beauty?" Chu Ping showed an embarrassed expression. At the door, Lady Xianxia, who had changed her clothes, had already lifted the curtain and slowly walked in. She bowed to the few people and said softly, "This little girl thanks the few young masters for saving me just now." Cui Shixin pushed Chu Ping, who was stunned, in place and said with a smile, "What are you waiting for? Help the lady up. Put me down." In a certain alley, a middle-aged man patted the shoulder of a big man who was running wildly and said indifferently. The big man panted and said, "Fifth master, a wise man does not fight when the odds are against him. A gentleman's revenge is never too late. Put me down." The big man stopped and put down the middle-aged man he was carrying on his shoulder. The middle-aged man looked at him and asked, "Am I a joke?" The big man was startled and suddenly shook his head. "Fifth master, you must be joking. Who dares to say that you are a joke? Hit me." The big man's eyes widened. "Hurry up, hit me." The middle-aged man looked at him and said expressionlessly, "Just like what I did to the lady just now." The big man reached out and touched the middle-aged man's forehead and said with some worry, "Fifth master, how about I take you to see a doctor? Do as I say or I will deduct 1 month's salary." Slap. The big man swung his arm and slapped the middle-aged man's face. The middle-aged man staggered and stood up with the help of the wall. He looked at the big man with a sullen face and asked, "Did I hit you that hard just now?" "Very hard." The big man scratched his head and said with an apologetic smile, "I'm sorry, fifth master. How about we try again?" Chapter 866. The period from the Spring Festival to the Lantern Festival was the busiest time of the year for the brothel. Li Yi sat in front of the window of the small building writing the latest plays. The reason why the brothel could be so popular was because of the endless wonderful stories and the essence of the culture of the Wuxia people for thousands of years in his mind. Obviously, the old-fashioned scripts from the brothel could not meet the needs of the people. Wan Ruoqing pushed the door open and came in with a food box in her hand. She said softly, "I've been busy all morning. I cooked some porridge. Have some." "It's okay. Put it there. I'll eat it after I finish writing this part." Li Yi raised his head and said, but his stomach was growling. He hadn't eaten anything since morning, so he was really hungry. However, there was not much left to write. He didn't want to be interrupted in the middle, which would be troublesome. Wan Ruoqing came over with the food box, took out the bowl of porridge and sat beside him. She said, "Eat some first. The script is not urgent." Li Yi didn't say anything this time. He picked up the spoon with one hand and the other hand was not idle. He drank a mouthful of porridge, wrote a line of words and then drank another mouthful. He was thinking about whether it was suitable to use a certain plot here. The spoon in his left hand gradually stopped in the air. Then a soft hand took the spoon from his hand and brought the spoonful of porridge to his mouth. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "You can't do two things at once. Let me do it." Li Yi smiled awkwardly and said, I'm sorry. Only a hedonistic young master from a wealthy family could enjoy such treatment. It was too extravagant and depraved. In order to express his uneasiness and apology, Li Yi decided to write another 20% discount. Only then would he be able to gain some peace of mind. Li Yi swallowed the porridge she fed him and asked casually, "How are the children recently?" "These days they are learning something from the old people in the brothel." Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, "It's not a good idea to keep doing cleaning work. Learn more and you can support yourself in the future. It's up to them whether to stay in the brothel or choose other jobs." Li Yi felt that this was a good idea. Although they were all children, there were still some very talented ones among them. They grew up in the brothel, so their feelings for this place were naturally extraordinary. If they were trained well, they might be entrusted with important tasks in the future. Then they talked about the brothel. Although the script couldn't be finished, the porridge would eventually be finished. When Ruoqing put down the bowl, there was no point in continuing. He stood up, stretched his body and said, "Let's go for a walk." Wan Ruoqing nodded slightly. Even though there were many things to do in the brothel before the Lantern Festival, what could be better than two people walking together? Of course, Li Yi knew that even if it was just the two of them walking together, she would be happy for the whole day. But he didn't know that as soon as he walked downstairs, he met someone he didn't want to meet now, especially at this time. The new capital governor, Lord Zheng, was dressed in casual clothes and didn't have any attendants around him. In the brothel where people came and went, it was easy to be lost in the crowd. Xianxia stood opposite, looked at him and said, "Drunk Ink said you were here." Of course Drunk Ink knew that he was here. He came from Willow Lane. Li Yi looked at him and asked tentatively, "What's the matter?" "What's the matter?" meant that if you have something to say it quickly or leave quickly. "Didn't you see that I have important things to do here? Don't you know that it's not appropriate for you to appear now? Can't you change the time?" Obviously, Lord Zheng didn't understand what he meant. He said, "This is not the place to talk." Wan Ruoqing showed a slight smile on her face and said, "Lord, come in and talk." Li Yi shook his head and walked into the small building again. Xianxia picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip before saying, "I've already ordered people to renovate that house. Too much time has passed and it can't be exactly the same as it was 10 years ago, but it should be 70 to 80% similar. Drunk Ink's birthday is in April, so time is tight." Li Yi nodded and said, "A few days ago, Lu Yi found some suspicious points in the files of the Ministry of Justice. However, it was a case from 13 years ago after all. It has been a long time and the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue died on the way to exile. There are many clues that are hard to verify. However, this is not a difficult matter for him. He should be able to make it in time." Xianxia looked up at him and asked, "A few days ago there were rumors about the eldest princess among the people. You should know who did it, right?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Summoning the king of Shu back to the capital to replace the eldest princess in governing the country. Naturally, it will be whoever benefits the most. Xianxia, the head of the Chui family, has fallen ill." Xianxia put down the teacup and said, "Now the head of the Chui family is the second son of the Chui family, Cui Qingming. This person is more difficult to deal with than Xianxia. He has always been ruthless and will do anything, even disregarding the consequences. You should be careful. He looked at Li Yi and said, don't think that the Cui family only has this little ability. This time the crown prince has disbanded the imperial astronomer, and the Cui family's rumor campaign has also been stalled among the people. Although I don't know what you are thinking, I think you don't want the king of Shu to return to the capital and replace the eldest princess in governing the country. Not to mention other things, if Grand Tutor Chu takes the lead this time, it will not be so easy to solve this matter. Grand Tutor Chu will stand up for the Cui family. Li Yi actually had a good impression of this Grand Tutor Chu. The old man did not seem to be as pedantic as he imagined, and this time he did not stand with the Cui family to make things difficult. If it was really as Xing Shichen said, then the matter would really become troublesome. Xing Shichen shook his head and said, according to the Grand Tutor's temperament, he won't. His tone changed and he said, I'm afraid. Afraid of what? Xing Shichen shook his head again and said, I think I'm overthinking. In short, the Cui family will not let this matter go easily. You must be careful. Li Yi nodded and said, I know. In his heart he had never underestimated the Cui family. Some extreme measures were not to be used until the last moment. It was better to take things step by step. After that, Xing Shichen only cared about drinking tea and did not say anything else. Li Yi suppressed some of his thoughts and thought about the walk with Ruoqing. Seeing that Lord Xing did not seem to have any intention of leaving, he asked tentatively, Lord Xing, would you like to stay and have a meal? Generally speaking, when visiting someone's house at the last minute and hearing the host's invitation to stay, one should decline and stand up to say goodbye. This was an invisible tacit understanding between people. However, as soon as the words left his mouth, he regretted it, because historical experience showed that he and Lord Xing did not have this kind of tacit understanding. As expected, Xing Shichen put down his teacup and raised his head. After the family banquet, when Chu Ping was helping Grand Tutor Chu back to their room, he suddenly asked, Grandfather, when will the next time we go out? I'm old and can't walk anymore, Grand Tutor Chu said, then raised his eyes to look at him and asked, What, you don't like the capital and want to go out? No. Chu Ping repeatedly shook his head. Although the outside world is more knowledgeable, the capital also has its advantages. Grand Tutor Chu nodded and said, These years outside you've already seen many things. What you need now is to calm your heart and settle down. Don't follow those people outside and fool around. I know. Chu Ping repeatedly nodded and said, I'm not fooling around. It's just that my zither skills have improved recently and I often go to the music hall to listen to music. All right. After returning to their room, Grand Tutor Chu waved his hand and said, The Lantern Festival is approaching, you can relax a little. You can go. Chu Ping helped Grand Tutor Chu to his bed and said, Grandfather, rest well. I'll take my leave. Miaoying Pavilion, Lady Shuang. In the Cui family, Cui Qingming stood in front of the door and looked into the distance.